All right, good morning, everyone. One moment. All right, get rid of the echo. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, July 2nd. It is 9 a.m., and I would like to call this meeting to order. As you can see, let me begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. With me here today is board member Laurel Firestone, board member Sean McGuire, and board member Nicole Morgan. Joining us today as well is board member Executive Officer Eric Oppenheimer, our two chief deputies, Karen Mogus and Jonathan Bishop, our chief counsel, Michael Lawfer. Our clerk of the board is Courtney Tyler, and assisting her this morning is Margie Argel, Meredith Thompson, and our newest member of the executive team, Liz Carrillo. As you can see, this meeting is being webcast and recorded. It is a hybrid meeting. For those of you joining us virtually, you're either viewing us through our customary webcast at Cali PA website or the YouTube Live website. But if you intend on commenting on any of today's items, you need to be on the Zoom platform. There are instructions on how to do so at the top of today's agenda. If you're having any challenges getting onto the platform, though, please do just email the clerk of the board at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she can help get you onto the platform. Once you're on the platform, your camera will be off. You will be on mute until it is your turn to speak on the item you've indicated. For everyone in the room, good morning. Good to see you all. We're here in Sacramento in the California Environmental Protection Agency building. A few announcements for us as well. Please do observe the exits. If we happen to have an emergency, we'll calmly file out to Cesar Chavez Plaza and await further direction. Additionally, if you intend on commenting on today's items, you need to be on, please do fill out, that is the notice here at the side of the room. There's a QR code. There's also a laptop. And if you're having any challenges, please do just go to the clerk of the board and she can help sign you up. With that, we can get into our first order of business, which is public forum. And I believe we have a few public forum commenters this morning. First commenter, I believe, will be Molly Green.
Hi, good morning, Chair and board members. I'm Molly Green with San Francisco Baykeeper, and I'm speaking in reference to a letter that Baykeeper sent last week regarding the dewatering of the Lower Merced River. Most of us know the Merced River well. The name evokes the stunning images of the river's course through the Yosemite Valley, meandering through pine forests, cutting through granite cliffs. But downstream, the Lower Merced River sits neglected as excessive diversions, coupled with a lack of summer flow requirements, cause the river to go dry, imperiling the river's native fish species and their habitat. In 2022, the National Marine Fisheries Service alerted the state board to bank-to-bank dry conditions in the Lower Merced that persisted for several months. To date, the state board has failed to take any action in response to the agency's concerns. This inaction goes against the state board's duties under a slate of federal and state laws. First, Porter Cologne requires the state board to establish objectives in its water quality control plans that will ensure the reasonable protection of designated beneficial uses. Seasonal dewatering of the river does not protect beneficial uses because it diminishes the river's value as habitat and threatens the continued viability of native fish. Second, the Clean Water Act requires states with water quality control plans to have standards in place for fish and wildlife protection. Current water quality standards violate the Clean Water Act because they do not adequately protect the fish populations whose viability depends on flowing water in the Merced year-round. Third, under the public trust doctrine, the state board has an affirmative duty to consider the public trust in the planning and allocation of water resources, and to consider the public trust uses wherever feasible. Wild fish are quintessential public trust resources. Fourth, California Fish and Game Code Section 5937 requires the owner of any dam to release sufficient flows to maintain fish in good condition below the dam. Near zero flows do not maintain fish in good condition. Fifth, the California Constitution prohibits the unreasonable use of water resources. Uses of water that completely dewater rivers are necessarily unreasonable. Sixth, The Endangered Species Act requires federal agencies to ensure that their actions will not jeopardize the continued existence of listed species. So when the state board issues its water quality certifications for the two major hydroelectric dam projects currently undergoing relicensing, it must impose conditions that protect the federally listed steelhead, including summer flow requirements. In sum, the state board has a legal duty to protect the Merced River's native fish species and their habitat. The state board's failure to respond to the dewatering of the lower Merced has left the native fish who rely upon it for rearing, migration, and spawning in danger of further decline. The state board must protect native fish populations by adopting in-stream flow requirements for the summer months now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Appreciate your comments this morning and continued engagement on this issue. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Derek Eurosek, who will be followed by Ali Sahabi.
Good morning, Chair Escobar and members of the board. My name is Derek Eurosek, and I am the chair of the Kern County Subbasin Coordination Committee, which represents all of the Kern County Subbasin GSAs. Today, I'm here to reiterate the Kern County Subbasin's request that the state board evaluate the 2024 amended Kern County Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan submitted on Tuesday, May 28th, as the foundation for any report or decision regarding a probationary hearing for the subbasin. A culmination of over 11 months of intense subbasin-wide collaborative work between the Kern County GSA policy and manager representatives, along with more than 1.3 million in technical consultant support and frequent meetings with state board staff, the amended GSP is the most accurate reflection of the progress made towards sustainable groundwater management in the Kern County subbasin to date. Our request for the staff report to be based upon amended GSP is based upon the following logic. 1, the amended GSP is not merely a revision of the subbasin 2022 GSP submittals to the Department of Water Resources. It is a completely new plan that addresses the deficiencies identified by DWR, entirely replaces the previous Kern County subbasin GSPs. The subbasin appreciates the significant effort required for the state board to implement SGMA state intervention process. As previously stated by state board staff in consultation meetings, both the staff time and resources times are limited. In the spirit of the subbasin and the state board collaboratively and efficiently making actionable progress towards achieving groundwater sustainability in the Kern County subbasin, writing and releasing a state board staff report on the obsolete 2022 GSPs may not be a prudent use of time of the state boards nor the subbasin's limited time and resources. State board staff has been aware of the intent to submit an amended GSP and the timing of the submittal. Throughout the 11-month development period, the subbasin kept the state board staff informed on a monthly basis regarding the progress and anticipated submission date of the amended GSP. Number 3, the potential release of a staff report reviewing the 2022 GSPs would undermine the subbasin's current outreach and engagement efforts that are entirely focused on gathering meaningful stakeholder feedback on the amended GSP prior to final adoption in the fall of 2024. A staff report reviewing out-of-date GSPs may inadvertently signal to the public that they should be focused on providing feedback on the 2022 GSPs, rather than the amended GSPs, causing further confusion regarding the logistics of the state intervention process within the subbasin. Number 4, State Board and Department of Water Resources needs to provide joint guidance related to the review of an amended or revised GSPs that are submitted prior to the basin being placed on probation. In closing, we reiterate our request that the State Board staff evaluate the 2024 amended Kern County Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan as the foundation for any staff report or decision regarding a probationary hearing. A staff report, if any, based upon the amended GSPs provides an opportunity for the State Board staff to provide clear, defined, and formal feedback on the subbasin's most recent efforts, which is extremely valuable as the subbasin continues to move towards groundwater sustainability. Thank you for your consideration.
And thank you for your time and comments this morning, Mr. Eurosec. I know we'll have further conversation around the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so just, the requests are noted and appreciate the engagement here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next, I'd like to call up Ali Sahabi.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present in front of you this morning. My name is Ali Sahabi of Optimum Group. I am speaking today on behalf of the Soboba Band of Lucinia Indians, a federally recognized tribe in Riverside County. This is specifically regarding the Soboba and surrounding community septic to sewer project. This septic to sewer project service area has been identified as a severely economically disadvantaged community based on household income of $51,000. We have been working on this project for many, many years. Specifically, it started with a feasibility study in collaboration with Santa Ana Watershed Authority 10 years ago as part of the One Water, One Watershed project. Our application for funding has been completed as of yesterday, and our engineering plans are 95% complete for our phase 1 collection system. Soboba has worked hard in collaborating regionally and locally, specifically with Eastern Municipal Water District on this important regional project. Our environmental report is underway currently, and Water Board is serving as lead agency for this project. This project is essentially shovel-ready, ladies and gentlemen. We could be under construction within less than 6 months. Soboba was informed that this project would, based on the standard formulas, would qualify for up to $37.5 million in assistance as a priority severely disadvantaged community for this septic to sewer project conversion. We understand the current economic condition of the state and the budget deficits and so on. But this is an important project. This has been truly a collaborative locally and regionally project that has been in the works for more than a decade. And it really needs to be funded. Therefore, we request that the board declare Soboba's project eligible for funding and award Soboba partial funding of $20 million to enable the first phase of our project, the on-reservation sewage collection system, to advance now. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman and the board members, this is a unique opportunity. This is unlike any other project that has been provided in the staff report, in a way that this is the first time that the state will be funding a project for a tribe, a federally recognized tribal community in collaboration with others in the community. And so this truly is different and truly will be a historic event. And because I know personally that the state has had the intention of working with the tribal communities, but there hasn't been one project that has been funded as of yet. So in closing, I want to commend you and the Water Board. Your staff have been truly professional, responsive, proactive, supportive. I cannot tell you enough about our wonderful experience that we have had with your staff working with our consultants. With that, I thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, we will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you as well for your time this morning, Mr. Sabahi. I know that here we'll have a conversation here in a moment around the intended use plan and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and appreciated the outreach. I know folks have connected with our staff just to understand where the project is and its opportunity to be funded. So just thank you. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
All right, I believe that wraps up our public forum commenters, and just want to thank everyone that took the time this morning to address the board. And that brings us now into board business. And our first item is consideration of the board meeting minutes from June 18th. Looking to my fellow board colleagues if they have any adjustment, amendment, or a motion.
Move to adopt the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you both. Ms. Tyler, can you please call a roll call vote?
Board Member McGuire?
Aye.
Board Member Morgan?
Aye.
Board Member Firestone? Aye. Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
And Chair Escobar?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. The item carries and the board meeting minutes are adopted. Next, we will get into our main event for today, which is our board workshop on this year's Clean Water State Revolving Fund intended use plan. Invite up Mr. Karkoski and team up to transition. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Escobar and members of the board. My name is Mike Downey. I'll be presenting the Clean Water State Revolving Fund draft intended use plan for this state fiscal year 24-25. I'm going to try to move quickly. There's a lot of information, as always, in the intended use plan. So please stop me if I'm going too quickly, or you can give me the signal to speed up if I'm struggling here. With me is Deputy Director Joe Karkoski. We have Lisa Hong, who's the Senior Engineer overseeing the Clean Water SRF program, and Matt Wilson, our counsel to DFA. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to cover a little bit on the purpose of the intended use plan. We know we have a lot of familiar people with the Clean Water SRF program, but one of the hallmarks of the program is we always have new applicants for loans and grants. Spend some time on the loan capacity and then talk about available grant funds for our complementary programs for this year. Next slide. So the intended use plan has a few purposes. One is it is our business plan that guides staff for the Clean Water SRF program. Also included are complementary funds for small communities, that's small community wastewater grant funds, and the water recycling funding program. Those funds typically come from voter-approved propositions, general fund, and other sources. The intended use plan is also part of our application to US EPA to receive our capitalization grants for the year. And then many of you have heard of the bipartisan infrastructure law. That is included in this IUP as well, those applications. And I did want to mention that the 2024 Budget Act was adopted quite recently. So that is not included in this draft IUP, but I do have a few slides to talk about some of the impacts. And we would anticipate having a change sheet before adoption of this IUP to incorporate some of those impacts. Next slide. So the intended use plans have grown over the last few years with Bill. So there are intended use plans and supplemental IUPs as well. For the Clean Water SRF program, we really have the base IUP. And so that includes the base program CAP grant and the Bill supplemental capitalization grants. That includes all the complementary funds I mentioned previously. There is a supplemental IUP that discusses emerging contaminants. And we are proposing again this year to transfer that amount to the drinking water SRF program to be combined with the drinking water SRF emerging contaminant allocation from EPA. And I'll talk about that more on the next slide. So Congress appropriated about $850 million for California. Well, they appropriated a large amount, and EPA has allotment formula, allots around $850 million for California. And there's two supplemental funding through Bill for California. There's the general supplemental funding, and that can be used for any project. This year's allotment is $163 million. And then there's the emerging contaminant funding. And so this year's allotment is $15 million. So as I mentioned, we apply for those funds through this intended use plan to EPA. And one thing we need to do is demonstrate that we have demand and applications for those funds. And so we have not really seen the demand come in for the Clean Water SRF emerging contaminant funding, but we have a huge demand on the drinking water side. Combine that with the relatively low amount of $15 million that we've combined those two the last 2 years and are recommending that again so that we can apply this year for the full amount. And we're using the drinking water emerging contaminant fundable list to demonstrate we have the demand needed to receive the full allotment from EPA. Again, that's, we're asking you to approve that on a year-by-year basis. So there's 2 additional years of bill funding for emerging contaminants. And so happy to have further discussion with stakeholders if we're thinking that other wastewater agencies would be applying for those funds. Next slide. So those were the bill allotments. This is a quick look at the base program. So California has been receiving for a few decades now an annual allotment for the Clean Water SRF, which capitalizes the program. And one thing that I wanted to note is that the capitalization grant has been reduced over the last few years in conjunction with Bill. So primarily due to congressionally directed spending, could also be referred to as federal earmarks. So those funds come out of the SRF program before it gets allotted to states. And so the program historically was receiving $110 million a year. This year is around $58 million. And then we're continuing to recommend we use the maximum amount for principal forgiveness that we're allowed, and that's 40% of the cap grant.
For what it's worth, I know Congress used to have congressionally directed spending in the drinking water and wastewater space prior to them reemerging here. But in that entire time, they were separately paid for. It wasn't paid out of the base program. That's a very significant policy change coming from DC. I know we've been tracking this. And ultimately, what year is it that the bipartisan infrastructure law supplements are no longer with us? Is it 2025, 26 or 26, 27?
It is the 26, 27. I always have to line it up. They use federal fiscal year 26. And actually the next slide, thank you, Chair Esquivel.
teed you right up.
Actually go one more, and then I'll come back to this one. This hopefully demonstrates, I think, what you're asking as well. So you can see that the green is the base program, the yellow is the bill. So even though the base program has been lower than historical these last few years, we overall are getting more funding thanks to the bill funds. So what most states are concerned about is, the year after the 2026 year, where we would see this big drop off if congressionally directed spending were to continue and Congress didn't appropriate at a higher level. They're authorized right now to appropriate more funds, but the amount they've been appropriating has resulted in the base program cap grants that we've been getting.
Much appreciated.
I'll also note that although the capital would be missed, and that's less funding for loans, principal forgiveness, also part of the cap grants is an amount for administration, for technical assistance, and so just for running the programs themselves. I know that most states are very concerned from that standpoint, a little more so on the drinking water side, but has similar impacts to clean water. Can you go back one slide, please? Thanks. So the blue graph shows the amount of capital we'd be getting this year and how much is base, how much is bill. That makes up about 220 million total. And then on the right, we're showing how that's being used. So as I mentioned, some can be used for administration and technical assistance. Bill has a mandatory 49% that needs to be administered as principal forgiveness, which is very similar to a grant. And then the rest would be used for loans. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so getting into the demand on the program. So one way that we're looking at demand is in the recent Clean Watershed Needs Survey. So all the states support EPA every 4 years in completing a needs survey. And so these are either documented projects in capital improvement plans that are eligible for clean water SRF funds. There's also some state-approved methods to help calculate some of the more difficult project types like non-point source and some of the stormwater projects. But overall, California identified $65 billion in needs over the next 20 years. And this is just needs that are documented. So we believe the needs are higher than that. And based on our current level of appropriations and our leveraging, we believe the Clean Water SRF program could finance about $9 billion of that. So we see that the demand is high. Now, these are more theoretical demand. And the next slide, I believe, will get into more of the actual application demand we currently have. For the Clean Water SRF loans, so the green for all of these is the amount of funding we believe we have available this year. And then the red is actual applications that have been submitted with the requested amount for the project. So you can see that for almost all programs, the demand far outweighs the capacity. And so that informs our recommendations here in the draft IUP. I will mention for stormwater, there is few funding sources at the moment. There's also less demand at the moment. However, stormwater projects often have a more challenging time submitting applications because they don't necessarily have other options if specific funding is not available. For example, water recycling projects often are Clean Water SRF eligible. They have a pledged revenue source. They can take a loan. Stormwater projects don't quite have that same ability. So we do think the stormwater demand is out there, but we're not seeing the amount of applications at the moment.
Was glad to at least see the recent San Diego project go through, which again, to your point, at least has because of a local tax measure, has a repayment stream to be able to tap the loans.
Yes, thanks. Next slide, please. So a lot of numbers here, but the long story short is we have a lot of applications, 234 requesting almost $5 billion worth of funding. And so the idea of the intended use plan's fundable list is identifying which projects we believe we can execute funding agreements for this fiscal year. Now, we, practically speaking, may not execute all of those funding agreements, but we want to set expectations, that there is funding for projects. So the projects we're adding to the fundable list is less than our comprehensive list of 234 applications. I'm not going to go through all the details here, but it basically is made up of rollover projects. Those are projects that haven't been executed but were on last year's fundable list, combined with small disadvantaged community projects. And I'll talk more about how we selected a subset of those projects based on available funds. And then adding new loans, water recycling, stormwater projects. And all of those add up to about 1.6 billion. And so that's combining the grant funds, the available loan capacity, and would represent around 73 projects. There are some ways for small community projects to be added to the fundable list as their applications become complete. And again, I'll talk about that more later around our further prioritization based on our limited funds of which ones we would add and trying to indicate upfront whether funding is in the cards this year or not for these projects. Next slide, please. One big question is our lending capacity. So how much money do we have available for loans? I'm not going to go into our leveraging story because that is a whole extra hour of discussion. But we do leverage the program. The board has approved just earlier this year the issuance of additional revenue bonds for cash to make disbursements to projects. And so based on this model that we run with our financial advisor, we see that lending capacity at around $600 million remains our sustainable lending capacity. That's good news because we're not expecting that number would drastically change from year to year. So in a lot of ways, updating the model, rerunning scenarios, just reconfirms that our assumptions are accurate and that we're managing the program effectively. So $600 million, what we say in the policy is we'll look at 90% to 125% of that when thinking about adding projects to the fundable list. And we do take a look at the 5-year average just because, the amount of projects we execute every year can fluctuate. But overall, we see our 5-year running average higher than that sustainable capacity, but is coming back down a bit. I mean, a couple of years ago, we executed $2 billion for the program. So I think that has some impact on that average. But I believe we're trending in the right direction here. Next slide. So I'm going to discuss, where we landed with our recommended scenario for adding projects to the fundable list. So a quick overview. What we do is we have a comprehensive list, and that looks at all 234 applications that are in different levels of completeness. That list is included as an appendix to the IUP. So anyone who submitted an application should be able to find their project there if they were submitted in the last couple months, unless they were submitted in the last couple months. And then, as I mentioned, we use the fundable list to identify those projects that our goal is to execute a funding agreement this upcoming fiscal year. And only projects that are on the fundable list can receive a funding agreement. So for small communities, when they become complete, they're essentially automatically added to the fundable list if they meet certain conditions. For our loan projects, we have a scoring system, and they are scored. The highest score is a 16, and that's how they're prioritized. And we look at the available funding and essentially lower that cutoff score until we think we're adding the right amount to the fundable list this year. And so if you go to the next slide, hopefully that'll explain it a little bit better. Actually, I'm going to come back to this one too. So go one more, please. All right, so I'll try to walk quickly, but the idea is if you look at scenario A, looking at a cutoff score of 15, that would add one project to the fundable list that joins other rollover projects. So that one project is not requesting $377 million, but that combined with the rollover projects would have $377 million on the fundable list, on this year's fundable list. And so we say, well, we can handle more than 377. Let's lower that cutoff score and see where we end up. So you can see that scenario D that's highlighted is our recommendation this year. It's a cutoff score of 12. That would add 14 new projects to the fundable list. And that would have almost $800 million in requested clean water SRF loan, recommending a maximum loan per project of 50 million. That's consistent with the last 3 years, what the IUP has established. And 800 million is slightly above that funding target range. But again, practically speaking, do we expect to execute every project this fiscal year? Probably not. We do see projects withdraw. So we feel it's prudent to go slightly over to begin working on these applications moving forward. And I do also believe that the maximum loan amount helps control a bit. These are estimated requests, but don't expect those to balloon uncontrollably. So now I'm going to go back one slide.
Actually, if you could just pause on that slide just for a moment. So for scenario D, the estimated loan amount, 798 million. Of that, how much is new loan, new projects that we're committing to potentially versus rollover projects funding? How's that allocated?
Thanks. Yeah, the rollover amount is around 350 million, roughly speaking, which makes 450 million the new projects.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. You go back one slide. Oh, yes, you're already there. Thanks. Okay, so I do want to pause here because last year's IUP did have a unique approved recommendation. And so on the left is last year's IUP adopted proposal. And on the right is how that compares to what we're recommending here in this draft IUP. So just going back in time a bit on the left, last year, we ended up adding well above our funding target range, ended up being 1.3 billion on the fundable list. And the board agreed to that with some stipulations. The board said, well, we'll do that now because of these urgent needs for projects after discussion with stakeholders. But next year, in the 24-25 year, we will add 750 million worth of projects additionally. And then the 25-26 year, that year 3, we would add 0 projects. And that way we would get back on track over that time period within our sustainable lending capacity. So I'm already recommending we don't do that, but for a good reason, I hope. So what we saw was $500 million being withdrawn from the fundable list, withdrawn or removed. So the board had also last year put in some deadlines for projects that had been on the fundable list for more than 2 years. Very happy to say almost all of those projects got into legal concurrence and complete applications and are being drafted right now. There was one, I believe, that was removed, and there were some other projects that were withdrawn just for a variety of reasons. So with that reduction of 500 million, which is almost a year's worth of lending capacity, what we're recommending this year is, if we just add a modest amount of projects, stay close to that funding target, we will continue every year as intended to add projects to keep the fundable list within our sustainable funding range. And that will just help with our predictability and help set expectations for stakeholders, which is really something that we've heard time and time again is what people want from the program, especially since these applications can take years to prepare for. Well, I should say the projects take years to prepare for. Hopefully the applications can be a little bit shorter than that. And so that's why we're recommending that change from last year. And if you go to the next slide, I'll expand on that a bit more. Go back one. Yeah, thanks. So we looked at scenario E and F, and scenario E and F are based on the idea of, well, what if we did stick with the recommendation from last year where we need to add 750 million in new projects? And so that could happen in two ways. So scenario E said, well, we could keep the cutoff score of 12, but we could raise the loan maximum to 100 million. Scenario F said, well, we could lower the cutoff score to 11, and that would get us to adding 750 million. So both of those, in our opinion, start to get away from what we've been establishing for many years now, and helping set those expectations and predictability. So the $50 million cap for loans seems to be about right for a majority of the projects. There's always some of these huge projects that need, $600 million worth of funding, but we're not going to be able to accommodate those with any cap. And then when you get to the 11s for the cutoff score, that starts to deviate from kind of the expected priorities that we've been establishing for a few years now with the scoring system. We've never had a cutoff score of 11. That starts to get the projects that maybe don't have a complete application. Perhaps plans and specs aren't ready. They're not, the urgency isn't there. They are not the compliance projects or water recycling projects. So still good projects, good CIP projects. But again, we're recommending scenario D for the predictability and just keeping that steady program lending. All right, next slide, please. I'm not going to spend much time here, but this gets at Board Member McGuire, your question a bit. That gray area below the 0 line, I was trying to come up with ways to show this, is the amount of rollover projects that we're not counting towards this year's lending capacity. Essentially, those are projects that are already being drafted. They're either encumbered or about to be encumbered. And so we really counted those as commitments already made. And when we did our financial capacity model update with our financial advisor, we included those essentially as executed agreements for the sake of the model. So there are more, you'll look at the fundable list and you'll say that the numbers I just presented to you don't add up exactly. And that's because there is a section in the fundable list that says funding decision in progress. And that represents those that have reached legal concurrence, they're being drafted, they're encumbered or about to be encumbered. And so that's why we're treating them a bit different when we're looking at how many projects we have capacity for.
Once those are executed, what does that bring, I guess, our actual from last year coming out of the program?
That is a great question that I don't have at the top of my head. Compared, as far as total agreements executed for last fiscal year. Yeah, it'll be, well, I don't want to guess, but perhaps I can get back to you after
that works.
Taking some comments. Next slide, please. So just real quick, one more look at the funding scenarios. That blue bar is that funding range that we're talking about. And so you can see that scenario D slightly above that funding range, but close to it. And again, just another visual to help compare the scenarios. All right, next slide, please. I'm going to pivot a bit into talking about some of the requirements that have changed over the last couple of years, or just this last year. And so one is Build America, Buy America. This requirement came onto the scene with the bipartisan infrastructure law. However, we had this transition period waiver for planning and design. That is projects that had already begun planning or design prior to this requirement coming out could be, essentially exempt from the Build America, Buy America requirements. So it hasn't impacted, these requirements haven't impacted any of our projects yet in a real way, but this year will be different. And part of that is as a bit of a surprise that waiver is going away. So even projects that may still have been able to comply with, use the waiver will no longer be able to. And so what does that mean? This is a relatively new requirement we're going to be figuring out together, but EPA has continuing to put out guidance on that. And this is beyond just the SRF program. So, right, so for all federal funds that were included in bill, many programs are dealing with this. So there's a large effort around this. What it means for our project specifically is that it's an equivalency requirement, which means that we don't need to apply it to every project. We just need to apply it to projects in an equivalent amount to our capitalization grants. So what we've done is we've selected projects that are already being co-funded with other federal funds and may need to comply with Build America, Buy America anyway. Started there and then also used other large projects because again, it's based around the amount that we have to meet. So we can impact fewer projects by selecting the larger dollar amounts. And so that was our goal here. So those projects are identified on the fundable list of needing to meet the equivalency requirement. And it's for the equivalency for 2024 and forward. So if they're a project that is being reported as equivalency for last year still, and that's kind of getting at those projects that are, about to be executed very soon, this won't apply to them. They can still utilize the waiver, but it's basically the new projects being added this year. And so we also selected only projects that were added to the fundable list. So any rollover projects that had a different expectation, the requirements will not change for them. These are for the new projects moving forward.
That's helpful. And quick question, I know obviously the waiver is going away, but is there guidance from US EPA at this point when it comes to, I know especially in the water sector, there oftentimes aren't manufacturers within the US that are able to provide, resources or items for these projects. So, is there clear guidance at least on how we would approach these projects, knowing that it does get pretty complicated for folks?
Yeah, not crystal clear, but there is a pathway. And so there are a variety of other waivers that exist. And one of the common ones that EPA is expecting to utilize is an availability waiver for specific products. So it's going to be hard to waive the requirement for the entire project, but specific products, they're expecting to utilize that heavily in these first few implementation years. There's also a de minimis waiver that projects can choose which items to not report on, and just some of that flexibility, because there's always going to be some products that are difficult. So this is different than American Iron and Steel, which generally should be widely available. But when we're looking at domestically produced manufactured products and construction materials, one example is plastic pipe is just not available domestically manufactured. They're not expecting that to change soon. So that's already been signaled from EPA that, let's start early on identifying those materials and processing a waiver or utilizing the de minimis waiver. So we'll work closely with applicants on that, because that is, you're absolutely correct that will be a challenge.
I really appreciate that. And just out of curiosity, how much of that work is necessarily on our side of the ledger versus the project proponents? Or I imagine it'll be a team effort in trying to unpack some of that, but.
Definitely a team effort. And the requirement isn't just to show certification of domestically sourced products. It's really having a program. So there is an establishing that there's a methodology and a process for the not only the contractor to go through, but the recipient, the agency themselves. So it is a robust effort, I would say. There's a lot of engagement from us. A lot of us is spot checking and also coordinating with EPA. And the difference with Build America, Buy America from American Iron and Steel is that American Iron and Steel was only an SRF requirement. So we're using a lot of the same certification process, a lot of the same processes, which is great. But EPA was the only one implementing that. Now with Build America, Buy America, the Office of Management and Budgets is involved, and the Made in America office within OMB. And so there's this larger federal organization trying to coordinate. It's making it a little bit more complicated, but EPA has been really great trying to streamline as much as possible.
Thanks. Really appreciate that, Mr. Downey. I know it's going to be continued discussion and concern for folks. So thanks. Appreciate that.
Next slide, please. One other element that people may hear about is EPA issued a timely and expeditious use memo earlier this year. And it really wasn't a new requirement as much as a reminder of expectations for the SRF programs. And to sum it up succinctly, all funds should be committed within a year of receiving the capitalization grant from EPA. And then there's some other metrics around disbursement. So how quickly are disbursements going out and matching the cash in hand. And the bottom line is EPA doesn't want the SRF programs, amongst all the states, to be sitting with a bunch of cash in their bank when they could be committing those to projects to get underway. So very happy to report that California's Clean Water SRF program is #1 in the nation in terms of these metrics, at least. And the drinking water program is #3. And so really a lot of that credit goes to leveraging the program. So we're able to commit funds before we have the funds, right? So that really allows us to commit those funds quickly. It does create a lot of additional work for staff to be tracking revenue bond proceeds and tax exempt requirements. It does pass some of those requirements on to the applicants themselves as well. But I think we do see the benefits of that.
Huge kudos.
Thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, getting in towards the end here, and we're going to talk about the available grant funds this year. So for our small communities, what we have included in the IUP is $180 million worth of grant and principal forgiveness. So this does not include any funds being, recovered in the 2024 Budget Act. So a few changes based on the availability of funds. Large DACs and small non-DACs were removed from eligibility this year. We also established a per project grant maximum. So in the past, there was a per connection grant maximum. So that per connection grant maximum is remained, but we've added an additional per project maximum. And then also removed consolidation incentives for this IUP. Something that is more heavily utilized on the drinking water side, the clean water side, not seeing much demand for that. So that was removed just based on limited funding. Next slide, please. So real quick look, you can see the maximum grant amount for default for projects will be 15 million is being proposed. And there are quite a few footnotes in the IUP with some different case-by-case scenarios. So in general, the deputy director could approve up to 25 million under certain conditions if there are available funds. So not positive at this point if a change would be needed to the language in the IUP if additional funds are available from the Budget Act. But we do need to look. That's the Budget Act made about $200 million available. That's for both drinking water and wastewater. So we still need to make a decision around splitting those between programs, as well as it's a new funding source. So it's not coming from the general fund. Now it's coming from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So staff, do need to do some additional analysis on, well, what are the requirements associated with those funds, and how does that line up with the types of projects we have? Will it, can we use those for septic to sewer projects, for example? That might be more difficult than some other project types. So, additional analysis is still needed to come with a recommendation for how we would split those funds and how we would utilize those funds.
Appreciate that. I know we will have further discussion on the split, but as I recall, last year at least, when the 200 million was deferred or delayed to this year, it was kind of roughly a $50 million drinking water hit, 150 on the septic to sewer projects, if I recall. But I know we'll have further discussion on how we'll actually treat it this year, but just wanted to, I think, give nod to that's the way last year, at least, that we had factored in the reductions.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Esquivel. Joe Karkowski, Deputy Director of DFA. Yeah, the other thing that occurred at the end of the year, one of the reversions was funds we had not encumbered from the general fund. So that was about 151 million in drinking water and a little over $1 million of wastewater. The way things worked out is originally we thought we were going to get the 200 million that was taken out this fiscal year put back in. So anyway, accounting for both that unencumbered amount that was clawed back, as well as, we had anticipated getting another 200 million. So bottom line, instead of getting about 350 million, we're around 220 some odd million that we're getting. The other thing is I'm sure aware is, often after the budget bills are passed, there's trailer bill language later in the summer. So we also feel like we should wait to see what that if there is any trailer bill language associated with these appropriations, because that might provide some more direction or provide for more accommodation in terms of how we use those funds. So like with the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, which also has the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund as a source, we're able to fund small disadvantaged communities if there's a climate resilience or adaptation nexus. It doesn't have to be a greenhouse gas reduction nexus. Right now, there's no budget bill language that would allow for that. So it may well be, we'll kind of see how things play out, that we will want to move forward with adoption of the IUPs and maybe come back to the board later with a decision on these additional funds. That should be okay. I mean, I don't think there's any harm in waiting a while to sort of see what the landscape actually looks like.
Really appreciate that. Thank you. Board Member Morgan.
Thank you. Thank you for the discussion here. Last year, I had some concerns with the split, and especially as far as septic to sewer. So definitely looking forward to the future conversation. Looking at this table here and the maximum, grant amounts, knowing that something can come, to us if it does come, a larger amount, but just want to know if you guys can speak to the amount that septic to sewer projects are coming in now, just looking at the, 15 million and thinking about septic to sewer. That's just something that is important to me, and just thinking about septic to sewer projects, their impact to groundwater, knowing that that is also a drinking water source, also, can impact public health, and, the projects, they just have multiple impacts, and we're really going to get ahead of the, I'm going to call, the long-term solutions that we're looking for within the state, as far as not just wastewater, but also drinking water. Septic to sewer, to me, is something that really need to keep a close eye on and keep moving forward. So just want to know if you could just talk a little bit more about what you're seeing as far as the number of projects coming in, the costs associated, just so we can get just a better understanding.
Well, the septic to sewer projects, there can be a wide range, and there are a handful of projects that are asking for a substantial amount, 70, 80 million, 100 million. And so this would limit those. We're discussing with those applicants now about, are there phases we can get started on? Are there portions, certain neighborhoods, to kind of have a smaller scope that we can take a bite of now and get some momentum. And then there are some that maximum would fit about right. And, talked about, up to 25 million if funding is available on a case-by-case basis. So that would cover some of those septic to sewer projects as well. But there are definitely a handful of big ones that, we can't fully fund if we decide to fully fund them, that would be all we're funding this year.
Yeah, another point, and we can certainly bring this information forward for the adoption hearing or provide it to you, as well as what we've already funded this fiscal year. We've funded some pretty substantial septic to sewer projects in the tens of millions of dollars. The total amount I don't have off the top of my head, but it's a huge amount that we've funded so far. So certainly, that was the priority for the general fund allocation, is prioritizing septic to sewer projects. And I think we were able to meet that priority. I would say, besides the total dollar amount, the per connection amounts are generally very high. Even where we have relatively, dense kind of urban-ish areas, there's still very, very high per connection amounts, like around that, $80,000 to $100,000. So that's the other thing we're definitely seeing. So even when we phase, it's still, the number of connections that you can get sewered is going to be relatively limited for that amount of money.
Hey, thank you. Just want to make sure that we're continuing to gather this information and have this brought into the wastewater needs assessment, which is really getting going this year, to get a good understanding. Septic to sewer, then also I'm going to bring in the small community land discharge systems, because these have great impact on our groundwater quality, groundwater wells, and just impact to just the environment and human health. And so really want to have a good understanding of what that need is throughout the state, and making sure that, we'll have further discussion. But for me, it is a priority, and want to make sure that we're continuing to move the projects forward as we can.
Thank you very much, Board Member Firestone.
Great. Actually, I'll just pile on there. I really appreciate your leadership on this, Board Member Morgan. And I was, maybe can I ask if you go to the next slide? Jumping ahead. I do, looking at the huge disparity in the demand and the amount of funding that we have, and hope, we'll get some additional funding, and we're not sure how that will split out, but certainly not close to the amount that we need. I do, really agree. And I think this is consistent with what you were saying in terms of the priorities. Septic to sewer is much more expensive, just like domestic well to public drinking water systems, much more expensive, but those are often sort of the most really environmental justice communities, where they've been excluded from funding and investment for a long time and often particularly are predominantly communities of color. And I think very consistent for us to be looking at, not only focusing on disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged, but looking at are there areas that really previously hadn't been sewered or connected. And I know like Matheny Tract and Fairmead are two that come to mind. And then I also just wanted to follow up on, if you go to slide 11. So looking at the I guess second to last row of incomplete applications. So my understanding, and I think you said this, was that, as those incomplete applications become complete, they can move up to, there can automatically be included on the fundable list. And so that could greatly increase, depending on how quickly they come, like practically double the amount of demand needed. And, you look at it's like an order of magnitude less funding that we have. And again, we'll have a little bit more, but those are just small DAC and SDAC projects. So I am super, I think we're in a really challenging spot on this. I really welcome, I think this next week, maybe we have the wastewater needs assessment advisory group. And I know there's work going on around trying to identify where the needs are. But I guess I'll just emphasize this is an area I'm also really concerned about and want to make sure we're prioritizing and making sure projects can move forward. But also recognizing that we just don't have nearly enough money, especially, on all fronts, but I'm really seeing it on the disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged small community wastewater side. Really just an observation, but I guess just saying that I do agree with, and I think consistent with the leadership that Board Member Morgan has been providing in this area, that the priorities that you have listed, going back to, was that slide 22, I think feel like the right ones. And unfortunately not being able to use grant funding on non-DAC and larger DACs, I think is the situation we're in. So appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member. Plus up those comments and appreciate giving nod. I think it's in late July here that the wastewater needs assessment advisory group is meeting. But not unlike on the drinking water side, that data and that assessment is so critical, even if, again, the funding isn't necessarily there or materialized yet, to really be able to advocate and understand what is the need that we have out there. So huge thanks to both board members here. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, thank you. I agree. This is a very tough situation to be in. It's not one where, I want to have to be forced to make a decision in terms of who gets funding and who doesn't, because they're all very valuable and important projects, whether it's septic to sewer or a community that's been struggling with compliance issues for a long time. So I just want to flag that on the flip side, there's those projects which take often many years to recognize, develop, work with communities to get them in place, ready to go to construction. They're not inexpensive. Even for a small wastewater treatment facility, those are incredibly expensive projects. I'm not sure, it's not clear to me from all this information today, if $15 million will cover the needs for those projects, or even with some of those, you'll be getting a request to go up and above the $15 million threshold. I'm guessing that you will, but again, I'm just speculating here. So that makes it difficult. And it also means that in cases, whether it's a septic to sewer project or whether it's a wastewater treatment facility upgrade, You have a footnote here that says the deputy director may reduce the funding if there's not enough funding for projects. And so, yeah, thank you. So that footnote number 2. So that, that means over the course of the year, as I read it, it's kind of a dynamic situation because you could have projects that come in, make a decision that, hey, this project needs that additional amount of funding, but that means the next ones that are in the line might receive less. And so I just want to flag that. I don't really know how to address it at the moment, and don't have a solution to offer, but it is a concern that I have, that we have projects now and we have some sense of what those costs are now. So the better certainty we can give to those applicants who have been working for many years to get to this point, that they're ready to proceed. I want to help signal to them that they have certainty, that they're going to be able to move forward, because for these small disadvantaged communities, my thought is that they're really dependent on this grant funding, that we may be in a situation that if we don't fund it, they may not be able to move forward. And so that is just, it's uneasy. It's again, a difficult situation. Obviously, if there were 4 times the amount of funding, we wouldn't have to have this conversation, but I thought it important to share my concerns.
Thanks, Board Member McGuire. The other thing we didn't expressly say yet is that we're also trying to manage the funding in anticipation of bids that come in for existing projects that are under existing agreements, right? So that's part of the management of the portfolio. So we're not expressly asking for prioritization of those. We're, I think, assuming that we should try to carry those through to completion. Now, certainly we will, look at bids that come in way too high and ask them, the recipients to do some, value engineering, if that seems appropriate. But that's the other, we want to keep some of our powder dry, because we do have a sense of how many projects are going to go through the bid process. We're seeing bids come in pretty darn high. And so we want to be aware of that as well as we're moving forward. So to your point, we'd love to provide some greater certainty, but that's sort of the other variable that we're trying to account for as we go through the fiscal year.
Appreciate that, Mr. Karkowski. Board Member McGuire.
Yes, sorry. Yes, thank you for that. I agree. There's a lot of moving parts here. And just a technical nitpicky question. I apologize for this in advance, but could you clarify footnote number 1? Because it says may approve financing for construction projects up to $6 million, regardless of amount per connection. So is that different than the $15 million, or am I just missing something?
Yeah, I think we've had this before. It basically, recognizes that for smaller communities, there's just some baseline cost to get a project done that may exceed those per residential connection costs. And so, like, for example, if the cost is, $175,000 or $200,000 per connection, but below 6 million, then we'll fund it. We'll be able to fund it without coming back to you, essentially.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
And appreciate the flag on what I know are the continued inflationary pressures on the existing projects that we have that, are coming back a lot higher, and here further depleting what we already know is a pretty small pool of funding that we're relatively working with. So I know that continues to be just really concerning on the ability to continue to fund additional projects generally. So just thanks for the flag.
Thanks for the great discussion. If you go to the next slide, I'll just hammer it home one more time. Thanks, Board Member Firestone, for pointing it out. So, we are further prioritizing small DACs. You'll note that in the previous year's IUPs, we essentially said, hey, if you're eligible for grant funding, you're going to be added to the fundable list as soon as you're complete. And we're just adding everyone, first come, first serve, goes fast as you can. And so that is a change this year where, we want to be clear, for projects that we don't think will have funding for this year. We want to express that. And so the projects that are on the fundable list, have complete applications for small disadvantaged communities, have complete applications and are either addressing violations or are connecting previously unsewered areas. And so that's that when you referred back to that slide 11, that's the difference in the numbers there that are complete. And also to your point, there are incomplete applications that are addressing violations and are septic to sewer projects, which we plan to add to the fundable list as they become complete. Now we'll see if we have funding available for everyone, but that's we're working on moving those through the pipeline. And so that is, I guess, a necessary process as well. I just want to point out that being on a fundable list, a project priority list, is an EPA requirement for the Clean Water SRF program. A lot of these projects will be needing to utilize principal forgiveness, which has some of those additional federal requirements attached to it, because that's the funding that we have available. Now it's predominantly principal forgiveness. And so, this is all a mechanism of that process. So they need to be on that list. The IUP establishes how the deputy director will add the projects when they're complete, and will update and publicly notice for 30 days that updated list. And so we plan to do that a couple times throughout the year as needed. Next slide. So not too dissimilar a story of a program that has more demand than available funding. The water cycling funding program. So this table looks a little different than the one that's actually in the draft IUP. And that's because that second to last column has the Budget Act of 2024. So that is the adopted budget that had a little over $70 million after you take out administration costs. It's almost $70 million for projects. So without that, we have $6 million available for construction grants. We have around 15 million available for planning grants. And so in the IUP, we state that we recommend a $2 million construction grant maximum, a 150,000 planning grant maximum, and essentially first come, first serve. There's more projects on the fundable list than grant available. However, with an additional $70 million coming back, the next slide has a few different scenarios that, again, are not in the IUP, but just we're bringing before you for discussion and for stakeholder input. And maybe I'll back up one moment and say, last year's IUP established a $15 million construction grant maximum. We came back before you in March and reduced that to $5 million based on the reversions that the proposed governor's budget had indicated. So, that the funds that were reverting was about $274 million. And so, the 15 million was based on a much higher available appropriation, obviously. And so this isn't recovering the full amount that's been cut from the program. This is recovering about, 70 million. Next slide, please. So that being said, we have a few scenario options that we're contemplating. And so you'll remember that in the March resolution, we also mentioned that the board may consider in a future IUP adding funds back to projects that essentially were cut. They were no longer getting $15 million maximum. They've been cut down to 5 as the maximum grant amount. And so restoring some of those funds to those projects would be considered. So here's us considering it. So scenario A, the proposal would be increase the grant maximum to 7.25 million for those projects from last year. And essentially, we're saying, projects on the 24-25 fundable list, because those same projects are still included. Most of those haven't been executed, or they were executed just so recently that they're still on the list. So that, our current fundable list should cover all of the projects we're talking about from last year and upcoming new projects. So that would be giving, $2.25 million back to some of the projects that are about to be executed. And then looking forward, would also commit that same amount to projects on the current fundable list that have just been added. Scenario B would fully fund small DAC water recycling projects and then split the remaining forward, essentially, because the past projects already got 5 million. So this would be saying, hey, for future projects on the fundable list, you get 4.5 million as a maximum grant. And I guess I should have clarified, scenario A was saying, hey, everyone gets the same amount, whether you're a DAC or not, right? We're gonna cap you at 7.25 million. And there's 2 projects that fall into that category. 2 DAC projects, yeah. And then scenario C contemplates, well, what if we fully restored, up to that 15 million maximum grant for the projects on last year's IUP that we're expecting that. And we prioritize those small disadvantaged community projects. We could do that with the funding available, and essentially be 0 grant dollars available for any new projects this year. So there's just some bookends, and I'm sure there's iterations between, but so food for thought. All right, the last substantial slide I have is on stormwater and estuary projects. I'll mention estuary first. This has been longstanding in the IUP. Estuaries are a eligible category for the Clean Water SRF. We're proposing to continue to have a $1 million maximum grant amount, just like in other IUPs. And for stormwater projects, last year's intended use plan established a $5 million maximum grant, and essentially set aside $40 million for stormwater projects. So this year, still keeping the $5 million maximum grant amount, but reducing the amount available for stormwater projects to 10 million, which is essentially 2 projects. And there are 2 projects in the works now. So that also, essentially does not add any new stormwater projects to the fundable list. And the real reason for this is a relatively lower demand from stormwater applications, combined with that, this is the same principal forgiveness used for small disadvantaged communities that are going to be working with violations or septic to sewer, those priorities we identified earlier. And so again, just having to make some tough recommendations here based on the limited funding. There's also some very limited, call it OSG, sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grant. It's quite a mouthful. That's a grant issued by EPA that we apply for as well. Relatively small, in the $5 to $10 million range. And we have a few small disadvantaged communities that we've identified for that grant, kind of still hinging off of previous stormwater Prop 1 solicitations. But so that covers a couple projects. But yeah, this would be a change from kind of the expectation of how much money is available for those stormwater projects based on the availability this year. Board member.
Thank you. Question. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. So we have 2 stormwater applications total, or are there others? So, because we're creating the fundable list. And so I just want to clarify for stormwater to make sure that I understand. So we would need the applications in now in order to put them on the fundable list?
Yeah, so on the fundable list currently, there are at least 4 stormwater projects. So there would be some on the fundable list now that would not be receiving any grant funds. And we are proposing to not add stormwater projects throughout the year because we wouldn't have any funds available to give them. So And last year we said, hey, as you come in, as you become complete, we'll also add you to the fundable list.
Okay.
So this would be a change there as well.
Okay, and so there's 4 now, and so so you said moving forward with 2 of those, and so 2 would not move forward.
So the projects that are on there now are City of San Diego and San Francisco PUC projects. So both of those potentially have revenues that they can pledge and take a loan for the other portion. I think San Diego's starting to max out their fee in terms of what they could leverage for loan. SFPUC is a combined system, so they could continue with a loan for the project, but wouldn't be eligible for principal forgiveness. I need to double check which project is. I think they both have a couple projects on the list.
Okay, and then so the OSG funding, and so that was historically done the same way, was you could be added and then have that part is the grant, and then you do the other part you have to pledge yourself. Basically, it's a match.
Yeah, I mean,
Or is that full grant?
The OSG, the idea is full grant. And these are smaller projects. They have to be small disadvantaged. So it kind of aligns with how we're talking about other small disadvantaged communities where they could be added automatically when their application is complete. So we have, I want to say 3 applications that we've identified that are on the fundable list, identified as OSG specifically. And part of that is that some of those are requirements associated with the grant itself from EPA being small and disadvantaged. And so we're able to use, well, I won't get into details. There's some match components, but we are able to cover that because they're small DACs. And as a program, we're able to kind of waive that for them.
Okay. So thank you. I was trying to remember. I thought there was a match, but so okay. Thank you. That helps. And so basically, so I understand what you are proposing. I'll wait. I do have just some concerns. It just seems that, stormwater, again, you said at the beginning, it is also an underfunded program, and where this is a place where we can fully fund a project for stormwater, whereas elsewhere we can't. There has to be, a match from the agency, whereas here's OSG, there doesn't have to be. So here's an opportunity where we can. Where, granted, it is a small amount. There's only a little bit that comes in every year. But there is an opportunity to fund projects. Now, I'm also, grateful for any funds that we can get into the wastewater program. But, I think we also need to look for the opportunities for stormwater, because that is a place where it's extremely hard to get projects funded. And if I recall correctly, you just said also, it's a little small amount of money that comes in here. And so it's, so something to think about for the OSG funds. It's just how we do that and how we really, get that word out to the stormwater community that this is an ongoing funding source for those small projects that are definitely needed out there.
Thank you, board member. Appreciate the strong advocacy.
Yeah, and Mike, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with the OSG projects that we are funding, so all that money is committed right down to projects. If I remember correctly, we were using our Prop 1 stormwater solicitation. We had a few extra projects from that, and so we're able to select those projects, but the amount is pretty small that's coming in moving forward. I do want to just follow up. I'm sure we'll get some public comments about this, but part of the reason, we have a relatively small demand on the application side, as Mike mentioned, is there really aren't very many opportunities for that loan component. So the applications we have a couple from the County of Los Angeles, we have a couple from San Diego, and like Mike was saying, from SFPUC. So they have that potential, loan component. So it really, if we really wanted an increased demand, if we had the funds, we'd increase the amount of grant or principal forgiveness available. Because certainly that's what we saw, like through the Prop 1 stormwater program, where we had higher, up to $10 million grant amounts. So we saw greater demand. And of course, part of the challenge too is that since it's hard to get funding for those projects, you don't have a lot of folks that are ready to submit an application either, right? Because that can be a pretty big barrier too. They're going through an SRF application. And so we won't necessarily see demand if folks don't have much of an opportunity or chance to get their project fully financed. Like Mike was saying, that we had that celebration in San Diego, and they had like 32 million in loan and 5 million of the grant or principal forgiveness, but they had a modest revenue source to pledge that loan. But there aren't a lot of those opportunities in other communities in California.
Yeah, the opportunity for availability of funding, I'll say, drives then the applications. We see that in the septic to sewer space, where we didn't have a lot of septic to sewer applications. Suddenly, a large pot of funding is available. People then are putting the effort into applications and creating the demand. So appreciate that.
Thanks. Well, next slide, last slide. Just a reminder that the deadline to submit comments on the draft IUP is July 14th, I believe at noon. And then we're coming back to you in early August to hopefully adopt this IUP. Again, expecting a change sheet, just if nothing else, but for the Budget Act implications. And I'll leave it to you all for questions or what's next. Thanks.
Much appreciated. The state revolving funds are definitely the workhorse of our financial ability to support communities, and just appreciate the good work over the Clean Water SRF and all the thought that's gone into how we take what I know are many different funding streams ultimately right now, whether it's the bipartisan infrastructure law, the base program, general fund supplements, putting it all into one place that hopefully folks out there are able to digest and be able to provide comment. Appreciate the good discussion we've had at the dais, but looking to see if there's anything here further that folks want to bring up before we start hearing from people. Okay, great. Hearing none. Let's move to our speakers, and I call up our first speaker here will be Bob Gore, followed by Chance Edmondson, and then Karen Cowan.
Good morning, Board. On behalf of the South Coast Water District and its Monarch Beach recycling project, the City of Fresno and its Daleville septic to sewer project, thank you. I'd like to praise the staff. They're always approachable and very clear and painfully helpful. It's wonderful. And for Nicole and Laurel and the chair, Fresno continues to reach out to its communities that may or may not be in its municipal boundaries, has for a decade, and works very quietly, but in good faith, to do septic to sewer, drinking water, schools. It's completely admirable. Thank you.
Thank you as well. I appreciate that leadership. I know up and down the state, where things are working best is when we have local leaders that are thinking the communities around them and here helping to better consolidate these services. So thank you, Mr. Gore. Appreciate that. Next, I'd like to call up Chance Edmondson, be followed by Karen Cowan, and then Don Patterson. And you should be invited to unmute here momentarily, Mr. Edmondson. Apologies.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and esteemed board members. My name is Chance Edmondson, and I serve as the board president for the Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District. We're in Riverside County. On behalf of EVMWD, I wish to express our deep appreciation for the strong relationships we've cultivated with the board and your dedicated staff. We're particularly grateful for the outstanding teamwork demonstrated with our severely disadvantaged septic to sewer projects. as well as the invaluable funding support we have received, which will help enhance the lives of many disadvantaged Californians, as well as improve the environment. Today, I'm here to extend our thanks for the critical resources allocated to our project. I also wish to advocate for maintaining a degree of flexibility in funding allocations. While we understand the necessity of capping loan or grant amounts for fundable projects to facilitate broader funding coverage, it's essential to consider factors such as escalating construction costs affecting the existing projects. The draft IUP rightly emphasizes that the Deputy Director should continue evaluating the Clean Water SRF's capacity to finance these increased loan grants amount for existing projects before approving loan augmentations and adding new projects to the fundable list. Allowing for the flexibility in funding levels would enable agencies like ours to navigate the cost increase due to various factors beyond our control. Moreover, such flexibility would facilitate reallocating funds in some fundable entities and are unable to utilize their allocated funds. Additionally, as outlined in the draft IUP, California anticipates receiving $15 million for fiscal year 2024 through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Emergency Contaminants Funding as appropriated by the bill. The State Water Board has proposed transferring the entire Clean Water SRF Emerging Contaminants Capitalization Grant to the Drinking Water Revolving Fund. We fully endorse this proposal and support raising the funding threshold to $10 million per waste system that applied previously, as outlined in the Emerging Contaminant Supplemental IUP. In conclusion, we are grateful for your ongoing support and urge continued collaboration to ensure these critical water and sewer projects proceed effectively. Thank you for your attention and consideration, and we appreciate all of your support. Thank you to all of your board.
Thank you, Director Edmondson. Appreciate those comments and engagement here and leadership. Much appreciated. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Karen Cohen, be followed by Don Patterson, and then Beth Olhasso.
You guys hear that little tapping?
Yeah.
Okay. Just to make sure it's not me.
Yeah, a little tapping. Yeah, that's fair. A little tapping going on.
Otherwise, I might need to excuse myself.
Might be Morse code. I don't know. Hopefully, we'll try to differentiate. Thanks.
All right. Well, good morning, Chair Escobar, members of the board. I'm Karen Cowan. I'm the Executive Director of the California Stormwater Quality Association. So I want to start my testimony today with, I guess on a positive note, is everything we're talking about today are all the projects that we all talk about that we want to get done, right? There's nothing here that we're talking about that doesn't meet the goals that all of us share and have in common. The hard part is there's more demand than there is money. So you all, with the big jobs, have to make a policy call about where that goes. So I'm going to offer it through the lens of stormwater. And board member Morgan queued up, I think, a little bit of probably of what I'm going to talk about. And probably a lot of this isn't news to you, but I think the context is good. So I'm going to start with the water supply strategy. So it's the governor's statement about what the state's top priorities are for adapting to a hotter, drier future. And directly out of the water supply strategy for stormwater, the goal is through permitting and funding, the state will incentivize local agencies to develop stormwater capture projects and help offset the cost of completing those projects. This is one of the state's top priorities. In the state budget, there's $0 allocated towards this. And that's not just this year when we have a budget crisis. It goes back to when we had a very large on paper budget surplus. There were also $0 allocated to stormwater. The climate bond just came in print on Sunday. So if you were like me, you spent your weekend working. There's $110 million called out as a line item for stormwater, which as a line item, that was a victory in and of itself to be acknowledged as a part of the water portfolio in California. And there's a secondary pot for about $100 million for urban greening. But combined, those two pots equate out of a $10 billion bond that's being proposed, that's going to be heard this afternoon in committee. That's 1.1% of the climate bond. So in terms of investment, we'll take it. We'll take every single dollar, but in scale, it's pretty small. Then there's Prop 218. We all know the challenges that stormwater communities have with Prop 218. We have communities who are trying to go out to get fees. Rancho Cordova, our neighbor here in Sacramento, just went out resoundingly defeated. And that was not for lack of years of effort of trying. Then we go back to our friends at the legislature with constitutional amendments. Last year, ACA 1 was passed, which had the opportunity to go to voters. So it was 2/3 passed by the legislature. And that would have helped with Prop 218 for new public infrastructure. It would have changed the voter approval threshold from the supermajority of 66.67% down to 55. Just this week, that was modified by ACA 10 and it pulled that portion out of it. So we are now back to where we were in every way, shape, and form. And that change is massive because where we look at a lot of communities, they're doing their polling, right? Because you can't go out multiple times year after year and keep asking for the same thing. So they're looking, when's the right time? When can we do the groundwork? When can we go out? And there are communities that poll between 55 and that supermajority. A lot of them do. There's some right now that are thinking about, can they go out? And they were going to until ACA 1 changed. Now they can't because they're polling somewhere between 55 and that supermajority. So that sounds really sad and depressing, and it is. And the reason I give that context is because I think this is actually something Board Member McGuire or Morgan, you said, which was, what discretion do you all have here, right? Here's one where you do in the intended use plan, you do have some policy discretion. So when I'm looking at the intended use plan right now, now this might be me of trying to figure out some of the numbers. So I'm looking at the executive summary for 2023, 2024, the fiscal year, and there's about 907 million anticipated to go out. Looking at the numbers going forward, so I know we're little apples and oranges. I just couldn't figure out where the full proposal was going forward. There's 19.5 million for stormwater. That's 10 million in principal forgiveness. That 9.5 coming out of the OSG funding from an EPA grant. That's about 2% again of the IUP going to stormwater. When you look at the Clean Watershed Needs Survey, which Mike brought up, again, I think all of us probably think it's an underrepresentation of actual need. I know by far it is. It says 16 billion for stormwater, and we can just show like 1 or 2 communities that trump that in 20 years. So it's an under percent. But anyway, 25% of the state's need is stormwater. So this to me is not a disadvantaged community wastewater versus a stormwater issue. This is what are we investing across the board in the water sectors. And if we're investing 2% in stormwater in the IUP, and we've got a 25% need that's on the federal level, what Congress uses to put money into the SRF, I think we are massively underinvesting in stormwater. And that's where I think you all have that policy call of what you can do about it. So in terms of demand, I don't think it's necessarily a demand issue. I think it might be a little bit of a process issue. And that's because for multiple factors. But even just in terms of scale, we'll start with a $40 million of principal forgiveness, and it was capped at $5 million a project. So that's 8 projects. It's whole 8 projects over a couple of years, right? That's not a lot of projects, but we'll take every single dollar we can. There are projects that there's inertia in the system. So the ones that have been funded have been projects from cities and communities who actually have some ratepayer base and something to start, right? So those are the projects you're starting to see. My understanding is not only there are 2 projects that are not being funded this year that otherwise could have been on the fundable list, but there were other people in the application process. So that to me is sort of a bad signal to the rest of stormwater that we're going to set aside money. People are going to say, okay, there's some inertia in the system because we only kind of can put projects together where there's money that we actually can build something, and people start the process. And then we say, oh, wait, no, it wasn't fast enough. It was 2 years, and we're going to pull the money back because there's not enough demand. The other thing with stormwater, I think from a demand perspective, is there kind of has to be a call for projects. If there's not a lot of awareness that there's money is available and we're asking for people to come forward, this is a big, black, murky, opaque box that people don't know how to navigate because the SRF is for communities that have funding. There are communities who have a ratepayer base. So if there's any amount of money, there has to be a really clear communication of here's the system, we've set it up, it's going to work for you. And then do a call and see what projects are out there. So absent that, I don't think you have a demand problem. I think we have a process problem of people knowing that their money is even there and how to access it. So it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're not going to allocate money to stormwater because there's not a lot of demand, but there's not a lot of demand because we're not getting projects on a list to come forward and say that, hey, we'd like to be funded. So I do have a couple of recommendations besides please don't take the money. One is I think we should do a call for projects for stormwater. I know relatively the dollar amounts are low. I know the dollar amounts are low for the OSG program, but we're not going to get the word out to people. We're not going to get access to these funds and show and demonstrate demand here within the IUP or even into Congress to show, like, look at all this unfunded demand that we have in actual projects and not just in abstract, here's our plans of what we need to do for our stormwater programs. And the other, I think that the application for stormwater would need to change too, because right now the application process is very much a stormwater or wastewater application. So we've heard from some people just getting through the application process, even for principal forgiveness, is awkward and bumpy because it's just not set up for a stormwater project. It's really set up for a wastewater project. So those are my two actionable things in addition to the call for hopefully retaining some level of principal forgiveness for stormwater. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Collin. I really appreciate the continued advocacy in this space. And, when it comes to the tension between developing the demand and being able to point to demand and then be able to then take that step to fund, I appreciate the recommendations and the creative thinking around perhaps putting out a call or here thinking about the application so as to tailor it a bit more towards stormwater projects so as to make that easier. I guess just for what it's worth to Mr. Karkowski, when it comes to a call necessarily for projects, have we done that previously? What sort of response have we received? Not necessarily on the stormwater side, because I imagine perhaps we haven't necessarily done that before, but at least, I know that as we can see plenty of demand when it comes to the wastewater sector and wastewater projects, but what has it been a tool that we've used effectively, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, you actually have an expert on your board to your right who's been through that process with our Prop 1 stormwater grant program. So certainly that's something, we discussed this as a possibility, to have more of a simplified sort of call for concepts, because again, the application is complex, it's very involved. So that would be a great way of doing sort of a quick kind of needs assessment. And, we could work with Cascade on the sort of the marketing of that and to try to tailor, requests for proposals or concepts. So it wouldn't be a huge investment of time or energy or effort. And then, potentially kind of stage that. Like, for example, with the Prop 1 stormwater grant program, we went through a couple of different rounds of that. And generally it's, sort of a call for the concepts and then following up with a more detailed kind of application and working with the applicants, but it involves like a score review of the concepts, a scoring, and then an invitation to apply. So we could certainly do that. I would want to also manage expectations too, because it's still done within the context of wherever the board lands with the IUP, right? So if, for example, we stay with the $5 million principal forgiveness limit, we could do a call for concepts, but then the response will be based on that limit, right? Versus if the board were to potentially go with a higher amount, I'm not necessarily recommending that, we have a lot of demands, you might get a different response, right? Because a lot of the stormwater, there aren't a lot of $5 million stormwater projects.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Krosky. Thanks, Ms. Cohen. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Don Patterson, be followed by Beth Olhasso, and then Christine Compton.
Good morning, board members. Thank you for providing the opportunity to provide comment on the Clean Water SRF Intended Use Plan. I'm Don Patterson, the Director of Finance and Administration for Los Bridges Municipal Water District. We appreciate board staff's efforts to work with the district throughout the application process for funding for a pure water project. As the board probably knows, LVMWD is 100% dependent on imported water. Our indirect potable reuse project, known as Pure Water Los Bridges Triumphal, will provide up to 30% of the district's drinking water needs of full production. Receiving SRF and water recycling funding for this project is critical to the successful implementation of the project and complements the 49% of project funding that will be received from the WIFIA program. This project directly supports Goal 3 from the most recent strategic work plan to increase water resiliency. Recognizing the competing needs for limited funding, the desire for predictability, and the importance of this funding to meet statewide goals, the district has been supportive of the board's decision to cap funding to benefit a greater number of projects. In order to continue to provide funding to critical projects each year, it's critical that the board continue to implement responsible funding within sustainable levels each and every year. Within this context, the district supports distributing the additional water recycling grant funding in the state budget to all eligible projects as indicated in scenario A of the water recycling grant funding slide. As for the IUP as a whole, LVMWD supports scenario D with a cutoff score of 12 and providing funding to 14 important projects throughout the state and believes that this is the best scenario to balance the competing needs and goals of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment.
Thank you for those comments and engagement, Mr. Patterson. Appreciate your time this morning. Next, I'd like to call up Beth Olhasso, be followed by Christine Compton, and then Mary Jane Griego.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, board members. Beth Olasso on behalf of Water Reuse California. We appreciate the opportunity to comment this morning and really want to thank staff for the ongoing collaboration on the IUP process. We've got lots of calls and they're always very responsive. So want to thank staff at the table for that. Going to keep my comments into two sections, the SRF and then the water recycling funding program, because it's confusing in both. We are generally very supportive of the IUP and appreciate the suite of options that we're presenting with the different funding scenarios. It was helpful for us to be able to look at those and kind of see, where we wanted to put our recommendation. We do agree that scenario D is the right funding scenario. And appreciate the pivot, seeing the different funding capacity to keep that consistency of getting projects funded every year. So we are supportive of that recommendation. Also really like how staff is looking at the equivalency projects and seeing, trying not to put every project having to meet those Build America, Buy America standards, because we do know those are hard to meet. We do think that we do need to do a little work on making sure we know which projects are actually getting further federal funding and aren't getting a waiver in different, not an SRF waiver, but, if you're getting WIFIA or, there's somebody that's getting a brick grant through FEMA, that are getting waivers. So make sure that we are finding the projects that are actually already having to do this and not just kind of pick the big ones that probably are going to have to do this. It might end up that way anyway, but I think we do need to just kind of drill down on that. And we're happy to help with that with our members, figuring out who the best people are to take that assignment. And we realize if not everybody takes that assignment, certain people are going to have to take that assignment. Some people might just have to do it anyway. So, but appreciate the idea there. And then onto the water recycling funding program. We were thrilled to get that money. We worked very hard in the legislature to get it. And it's a tricky one for how to handle this going forward. We obviously have members, we're calling it below the line and above the line, that, were on the previously awarded list and then are on the new fundable list. And we get that the board will want to take a balanced approach in putting new projects on the list, but also recognizing, we think it's very important that the board recognize those projects that that were on the fundable list, just hadn't executed a funding agreement and got their funding reduced before the budget came out. So while we don't have a recommendation at this time, we do think scenario B is, we will not be supporting that one, just off the table, where those projects who previously were awarded funding will not get any new funding. So we're looking at A and C. We also might propose a D where we want to recognize the disadvantaged community projects that are on this list and the fact that they need funding. We also recognize that they are not available for principal forgiveness. They're not eligible for principal forgiveness. That's a little frustrating to us. And when we might change those principal forgiveness rules, away so that some small community water recycling funding programs can be eligible, because they are taking up a lot of this limited funding that we do have available. We're not asking for that right now, just kind of noting that those disadvantaged community projects we are willing to support, but that is a lot of money. And sometimes not a ton of acre feet that we're getting from that money. So we are looking at other scenarios where the disadvantaged communities can get more funding. The projects that did take the cut in March are getting funding, and then new projects are also getting funding. So that's something that our committee and board are going to be talking about, and we look forward to putting that into our written comments. Sorry, we couldn't have it ready today. It's all getting turned around very quickly. We got this on Friday. It is Tuesday. We have a bond and a budget, and too much for us all, right? All at one time. And I do think comments are due the 15th, not Sunday, the 14th. 15, okay, because slide said 14 and my Sunday got rough.
Yeah, I worked in a buffer day for everyone. Yeah, no, 15th. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
That day can be make or break for sure. There's a lot going on right now. When it rains, it pours, it feels like. But just thank you. I really appreciate you helping us try to figure out that right balance on the recycled water side and just the continued great engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call Christine Compton, be followed by Mary Jane Griego, and then Angela Teeter.
Good morning, Christine Compton with Irvine Ranch Water District. Here to talk about the recycled funding grants. We were one of the projects that did get cut in March, and partnering with Water Use and many others really fought hard to get money back in the budget. So we fully recognize the need to fund new projects too. And so we're not here, advocating that we should get all of the money ourselves, but really would urge the board to take scenario B off the table. Those projects were counting on the money that they had been awarded and are trying to move forward. And so any reduction, and we recognize there will be some, has to be made up with ratepayer dollars. And so look forward to continuing the conversation. We're clearly part of water reuse and many others, and striking that right balance and making sure that the disadvantaged community projects get the funding that they so require, but wanted to at least make that pitch because these projects are moving forward. Our project is moving forward. We remain committed to continuing to expand recycled water, even though it's over 50% of our water supply locally. And so this project in particular is a substantial amount of water. It's about a 5,000 acre foot reservoir. So want to make sure that we're striking the right balance as a community and continuing to move the state forward on reuse. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Compton. Appreciate the continued leadership in all of this. And yeah, definitely a matter of fairness as we consider how we fund these projects. Thank you so much. Ms. Griego.
Good morning, board members. I'm Mary Jane Griego. I sit on the Olivers Public Utility District Board. I've been a resident of the South Yuba County all my life. So I'm here today to share with you some of my comments. For the past 3 years, the Olivers Public Utility District, and I'm going to refer to them as OPUD, has been diligently working with the city of Wheatland on a very vital and important project that will develop a regional wastewater system between the two DAC communities. OPUD will significantly modernize its treatment plant capacities and allowing the OPUD to accept Wheatland's wastewater. Wheatland will decommission its aging and environmentally challenging wastewater treatment plant, and OPUD will fully utilize its facilities with the approval of a state partnership. This project is essential to the survival and prosperity of these two disadvantaged communities. The benefit of this project in the Olivers community is significant. The Olivers Public Utility Wastewater Treatment Plant will have increased capacity and modernized facilities, lowering customers' rates by as much as 15%. I don't think anybody's doing that nowadays. Local partners, which include Yuba County and the Yuba Water Agency, have funded more than $15 million in design, engineering, and environmental work to date. The project stands ready to go to construction. We're ready. The total project will cost approximately $129 million. OPUD's portion of this project is projected to cost $27 million. When both parties of this project receive grant funding from the State Water Resource Control Board, the resulting local share will be at least a very significant 60% match. That's a lot for these two communities that have struggled to come up with this match. And it's only because of the partnerships that we've encompassed, and also the partnership that we look for with the state. We believe that Wheatland to Oliver's conveyance project would be one of the most cooperative and beneficial approaches to wastewater regionalization projects in California. It will also significantly improve surface water quality and protect groundwater, which is the source of our drinking water in the Oliver's Public Utility District area. So to summarize, OPED currently has excess unused capacity at its wastewater treatment plant, capacity that has depreciated over time and needs significant upgrades. The Wheatland wastewater treatment plant is also in very poor condition and needs to be decommissioned. By connecting the Wheatland with the OPUD through a new conveyance system, OPUD would be able to modernize its treatment plant and more fully utilize its capacity. The OPUD ratepayers will benefit through reduced rates because of increased use of idle capacity. The disadvantaged community of Olivers will also greatly benefit through this sanitary sewer overflow improvement, resulting in greatly reduced chances of flooding during heavy rain events. And we've been seeing a lot of those lately. Delay in this project means costs would increase, and there would be an increased chance of significant contamination for both surface and groundwater. Without your support, this project will be delayed indefinitely. This project is shovel ready, as I stated before. The Wheatland OPUD project has completed its design, its CEQA, NEPA approvals. Unlike some of the past award projects that don't promptly proceed with notification of an award, fiscal year 24-25 funds could be spent in construction in the spring of 2025. That's how ready we are. So I'm going to wrap it up here. But connecting two disadvantaged communities provides more efficient, modernized wastewater treatment and protects groundwater for both of these disadvantaged communities. The regional wastewater project is a long-term sustainable solution that provides significant environmental and water quality benefits. The roughly 60% of local cost share represents a significant investment for a disadvantaged community project and a significant leveraging of state and federal funds. Thank you for your consideration today. And if you have any questions, I'll be around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Griego. Really appreciate you joining us here in person and your advocacy and the leadership here on this project. It is an exciting one. So thank you. Next, I'd like to call.
Sorry, can I just ask staff,
yes,
can you
please.
just clarify, does that one fall, is there something in the IUP that just where the status of that is and how it would be affected by the IUP? Just clarify. Sorry to put you on the spot. If you can get back to me if that's not. Just want to make sure I understand what the issue is.
Yeah, I think the main issue is that as the authority that you would provide to me would go up to 25 million, I believe, potentially. And the cost of the project is well north of that, right? Well over 100 million. So I think that's the basic issue there. So last year, of course, when we had more funding, we were able to fund those big dollar projects. And now we're proposing that we limit or cap those.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Member. Board Member Morgan.
Can I just ask staff for a follow-up on this project and so I can get a better understanding? Because it sounds like there may also be potentially some compliance issues here, and just want to get an understanding of where they're at with the regional board and compliance and the costs.
Thank you, Board Member. And I know with the restoration of some funding, there's going to be a little more to work with as well, but for further discussion here for the board, certainly on how we treat those dollars coming in. So thank you. And thank you again, Ms. Griego. Well, next we have Angela Teeter. be followed by Bill Zanoni, and then Alexandra Ganell.
Chair and Board, I'm Angela Teeter with the City of Wheatland. I'm going to echo a lot of what Miss Mary said. We are working with OPUD right now. For the past 3 years, the City of Wheatland and the Olivehurst Public Utility District have been diligently working on a very vital and important project that will allow Wheatland to develop a regional wastewater system with OPUD and decommission Wheatland's aging and environmentally challenging wastewater treatment plant. The work in this developing the project, which connects two disadvantaged communities to Wheatland and Olivehurst, has had significant financial support from Yuba County and Yuba Water Agency. To date, more than $15 million of local funding has been invested into this project to complete planning, design, and environmental requirements. Like she said, this project stands ready to go to construction. Wheatland's project of approximately $113 million requires upgrades to some of OPUD's transmission lines and significant upgrades to the OPUD plant, an investment of approximately $27 million. The total project was projected to cost approximately $140 million. At the direction of the SWRCB staff, we developed a plan to construct the base project with a reduced grant request of $129 million. By deferring some project elements to the future, reducing some costs, and identifying significant additional local funding, the immediate need for the SWRCB grant funding has been reduced to $50 million. And now we are continuing our search for local funding. If the project receives grant funding from the SWRCB, it would result in more than a 60% local match. We believe the Wheatland Convenience Project to Olivehurst would be one of the most cooperative and beneficial approaches to the regional wastewater project in California, along with benefiting and improving the water quality of one of the most pristine rivers in California, the Bear River. Wheatland does sit in the Bear River floodplain with significant pollution risk of major contamination of both surface water and groundwater, and it basically a giant septic tank with leach lines. We do appreciate your consideration for this remarkably impactful project.
Thank you, Ms. Teeter, and thank you for the advocacy. And actually, if you don't mind just maybe answering, when you talk about a 60% local cost share, is that at the $50 million cap, or is that at the $120 million request? And Mr. Zanoni might be able to respond to that. So.
Whoops. Good morning. I'm Bill Zanoni, City Manager for the City of Wheatland. That was at the $50 million, but we are working aggressively to identify additional funding sources.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your time this morning. I will try and make my comments brief and try not to be repetitive. This project is a project that the City of Wheatland has been trying to identify an alternative to our current situation for over 5 years. We've been working closely with the Olivehurst Public Utility District for over 3 years. Our current wastewater treatment plant is 55 plus years old. It is at risk for failure due to age. It has no redundancy and no emergency storage. This project will take care of that. It will also eliminate secondary effluent discharge within the banks of the Bear River, and it will protect groundwater and surface water in Yuba County, Placer County, and Sutter County from the current discharge of secondary effluent. So we believe this is a significant project for our entire area. Since I spoke at your meeting in September, we have been working, our entire team has been working closely and continuously to move this project forward. We have a completed application. We have completed our environmental work, and the project is designed and ready to go. We've been working with your staff since November for our project application review. I believe the last meeting that we had several weeks ago, the environmental review is nearly complete, and the financial review is set to begin this month, I believe. We have been hopefully providing information, any information that's needed as it's requested. We desperately need this project. We desperately need this grant in the maximum amount possible. So on behalf of the city of Wheatland, I want to thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to hopefully a positive answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate that, Mr. Zanoni. And actually, if I can ask just one quick question of you as well. At the $50 million amount, does that allow you I know you would still need to be looking for additional sources, but would that allow you to be moving forward with the project? Just out of curiosity.
At the 15 million?
50, yeah, at the 50 million. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Thank
Thank you so much. Thank you for the leadership, and thank you for being here and your advocacy. Next, I'd like to call up.
Questions.
Yes. Oh, board member.
Sorry. Just one other clarification for me. These are, as I understand it, two disadvantaged communities, and that's a consolidation of both of them. And I'm just wondering if each one gets to qualify for a cap to the cap, or if since it's a combined project, and each one, if they were doing it on their own, could qualify for 15 million, if because they're doing it as a consolidation, that would allow them to qualify for 30, basically, under our, or how we deal with that in terms of consolidations.
So I know Matt's kind of looking that up, because I quickly looked at the list. I think there was one project from Wheatland and one from Olivehurst. So if they're actually distinct projects, that is a possibility. But again, it's still a zero-sum game, right? So no matter, the board could allow for a bigger amount for a regionalization project, but then there's still all those trade-offs that we've been discussing that come into play. And, I know we would have to do a deeper dive if there's partial funding, like are the project objectives actually accomplished through that partial funding, and what's the assurance of getting additional funding to complete the project. So that's another thing we would have to look very closely at. And that's kind of part of our funding decision as well, right? It's like if the amount we're providing isn't enough to fully finance the project or fully complete the project, we want some assurance that the project objectives have a good chance of being accomplished, right?
Yeah, and I'll just, I think a lot of questions and follow-up that we don't need to do at the meeting, but just to understand, and it sounds board member Morgan's going to be doing that, but I do think, one of the things one of the changes we're proposing here is to eliminate the consolidation incentive, but I do want to make sure that we're not, in effect, disincentivizing or limiting consolidation projects by saying, if they did it on their own, they could qualify for 15 million just by themselves. But if they join with another one, then they can only qualify for, 15 for both. We wouldn't want that. So just taking that into consideration as you're looking at what we finalize. And, I will say that, as we said at the beginning, we have an order of magnitude less money than we have for even small disadvantaged community projects for principal forgiveness, and especially, and these are ones that we're assuming may be ready to go. So we're not in a position that we want to be in here. And we do want to make sure we're helping things move forward. I know I've heard a lot about this project. Great project. And unfortunately, there's also a lot of other great projects too. So it doesn't make it easy. I guess I am curious, and, I was thinking about water reuse and some of the, even anyway, the different issues of, is there a way that, even 0% interest loan component could help, because I know that's usually any loan may be out of reach for, or not possible for a small disadvantaged community. But just, interested in hearing more on how we can make the really limited money we have go further. And not just, not even just specifically for this project. I was also thinking about understanding that for some of the water recycling funding. It's still a subsidy. It's certainly not as good as totally free money, but I'm thinking about how we're going to leverage what we have to make these projects that are ready to go be able to move forward.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I'm not sure offhand what we have in place now in terms of loans for DACs. I think we have had kind of the 0% financing, which in general, I think can be okay from a policy perspective because there's not a big impact on loan capacity. But to the extent that we use that incentive for other project types, where it's a bigger dollar amount, if you're not getting that interest repayment, at some point you're impacting the loan capacity. So we'd want to look at that before, coming back to you with any kind of proposal along those lines. Yeah.
Thank you, Board Member. Board Member Morgan.
Thank you. And thank you, Board Member Firestone. Just taking another look, just looking at what the priorities are and looking at the priorities as presented on, slide 22 and, this project here, the proposed project, when I'm thinking about, wastewater projects and, regionalization and taking a look at, two projects and two disadvantaged communities and their wastewater systems. You have one community that is still discharging secondary wastewater to the Bear River, which is, a pristine river. That's something to me that would fall under a priority of the first one listed here of an MPS facility. They're not going to be able to upgrade to tertiary treatment. And if we can do something, help them to eliminate that system and eliminate that discharge, that would be a positive. And then looking at, you have another system that it has the capacity. Yes, it is, it's also aging infrastructure, but if we can help to combine those two systems, and as Board Member Firestone said, looking at these as two separate systems, it would be 15 million for each. And if they're putting them together and we're eliminating secondary discharge to the Bear River, that to me would be a high priority. And also aging infrastructure of a wastewater facility that, again, that is in to me, a sensitive area of the state. Also, they brought up a third component, which was their aging, their aging conveyance system, that they're having SSOs. Again, a sensitive area of the state. They could break it up into 3 different components and get 15 million for each, and that's more staff time, in my mind, and drag it through. But they're looking at doing one project, really hitting all the needs of the area. And so I just want to, have further conversations about taking the step back, looking at what the full project is and how do we really, look at that and say, what is the project? What is the benefits? And look at a regionalization project slightly different than we look at an individual project. And, what are those benefits within the priorities that are presented? And, how does that align with them? And what are those full benefits with multiple communities looking at it versus, individual, if they were breaking, look at the system and saying, okay, well, let's break this all up and let's take them in individually. And so really taking a look at the full picture and scope of the project and, everything you brought up and, Mr. Kurkowski, all ballot, it's just really taking that step back, looking at this project and the multiple benefits that have been presented. I can see, that's part of, what I want to follow up on, get an understanding, because I can see where potentially, they're also looking at, the regional board, really speaking to them and asking for also some actions just because of, having overflows, aging infrastructure, secondary discharge to the Bear River. These are things that, as the boards as a whole, we would be looking at of really trying to move forward and not have, the environmental impacts from these multiple, issues that are occurring at these two, within these two communities that are also disadvantaged. So look forward to additional conversations and how we can really look at the multiple benefit of the projects. I look at this as multiple projects that have been rolled up into one. And how do we compare this to other projects that are potentially on the list?
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Morgan. Yeah, I think as we go forward and have further conversations, part of what we can certainly do is look at how our criteria would apply in cases like this, where there are a couple of communities or a couple of different project components that would allow for additional financing. I think the other thing we'll need some help and guidance from the board is given the very limited amount of funding, how do we tier and prioritize the various projects we have, right? Between other projects that are compliance projects or septic to sewer projects, that sort of thing. So we can certainly, I think, kind of get creative with how we're applying any limits that the board establishes, and allow for, as you're suggesting, some greater financing for a given particular project. But we'll also, as we're looking at all of those projects that have complete applications right now, and many of which are ready to move forward, how do then we do the further sorting and prioritization? That's where I think we'll need that additional sort of help and guidance.
Yes, thank you. Board Member McGuire.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree. This is a good example. I appreciate the comments, and a really great and very interesting and I think worthwhile project from Wheatland and Olivehurst. And I'm looking forward to seeing that move forward here. And just to build on some of the feedback and the challenges and figuring this out, what I think I heard was an ask for 50 million. Is that correct? Because that we're going back and forth here with 15, whether we could have two $15 million projects that would add up to 30 million. So maybe they're anticipating the additional authorization, the authority that the deputy director would have. So I just call that out because that sounds like that's the amount of funding they would need to move forward with construction here. And that would just add some additional consideration to how we would fund this project and what some of those trade-offs might be.
I'll add really fast that the chart as is written in the draft, excuse me, contemplates the caps as community caps. So we would just want to make sure we're clear then that these two distinct projects, both which are individually on the fundable list, would be different communities for the purpose of that cap. And so it's not capped at one $15 million or with discretion up to $25 million component.
Really appreciate that clarification and appreciate the good discussion around the project and the board member interests here. Okay, let's continue on with our commenters. I'd like to next call up Alexandra Ganell, be followed by Elena Muroff, and then Jared Voskel.
Hi, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. I'm Alexandra Ganell. I'm the Loans and Grants Director with the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. On behalf of the SFPUC, thank you. Thank your staff for all the engagement and work that they've done with borrowers, applicants in the development of this year's IUP. And we just want to say that we support the staff's recommendation of scenario D for the intended use plan. We think it strengthens the reliability of the SRF program to be funding on an annual basis. So we're glad that there won't be an off year. We also think it supports predictability, which we talked about a lot over the past years. You've got the consistent funding cap, and the cutoff score is looking fairly consistent since it's been put into place. We also appreciate that they've provided scenarios for the water recycling funding grant. We are going to be one of those impacted projects. So we just need a little time to look at it. We'll talk about it. We'll talk it over with CASA. We'll convey that to water reuse as well. And then we'll put our comments in our comment letter. Thanks again. Value the partnership with you all under this important program and look forward to continuing to work together.
Thank you so much. Also looking forward to working together in the comment letter. So thank you so much. Next, I'd like to call up Elena Muroff, be followed by Jared Voskuil, then Eric Oriana, and we'll wrap up with Debbie Mackey.
Morning, Ilana Muroff, staff attorney with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. We would like to share our sincere gratitude to the Water Board staff for all of the work put into developing this draft IUP and the board's continued commitment to funding wastewater projects around the state. We especially appreciate the board's dedication to prioritizing projects in small DACs, as has been discussed, and especially funding septic to sewer projects. We provide technical assistance on a number of septic to sewer projects in rural low-income communities of color in inland California. And we know that the successful completion of these projects means a great deal to the community members with whom we work. So with those projects in mind, we had 3 items of feedback that we wanted to share with the board today. So first, we understand that the board is facing a number of funding constraints. As staff mentioned during their presentation, the context around those funding constraints for the SRF programs might be changing, given the recent restoration of $224.9 million in the state budget and ongoing discussions around a climate bond. So while wastewater funding was not fully restored as was hoped for, we are hopeful that the partial restoration could still provide additional flexibility in project funding than had been previously anticipated. Second, we believe that the incentive projects for consolidations could be very important to the success of some of these small community wastewater projects. We understand that the priority absolutely is funding construction, planning, TA for those projects. However, given the importance of those incentive projects, if funding levels do allow for funding any of those incentives, we believe that the deputy director should have the ability to exercise his discretion in going ahead and being able to fund those. Based on that, we recommend a revision to the draft to retain the discretion to award incentives if sufficient funding is available. Third, we wanted to address the per project grant or PF cap for small DACs funded under the Small Community Wastewater Program. We understand that in many cases, the $15 million cap may be adequate to allow continued progress on septic to sewer projects and other investments covered under the program. We further appreciate that the IUP allows the deputy director to exercise his discretion in funding up to $25 million per community for a good cause. However, there are some really important projects that we work on for which we would ask the deputy director to be able to exercise that discretion in going above the $15 million toward the $25 million cap. For example, we're working on a project in Tulare County for sewer service to extend from the city of Tulare to the nearby unincorporated community of Matheny Tract. The total funding need for the project is already over $22 million, and we believe that the project likely would not be able to move forward if grants or PF did not cover the full funding need. Similarly, the Fairmead Septic to Sewer program in Madera County slightly exceeds the $15 million cap, even after factoring in quite significant funding provided by the High-Speed Rail Authority. So given the urgent need for these projects to continue and reach completion and rapidly increasing project costs, as has already been touched on today, we ask that DFI exercise its discretion to ensure that these projects are able to move forward. And we also encourage the board to exercise its ability to fund a project through grant or PF funding over $25 million if a project presents a unique circumstance and the board finds there is good cause to provide that funding over 5 million. So in closing, again, we would like to thank the board and staff for your dedication to the success of these programs and appreciate that opportunity to comment on the draft IUP. We will be submitting written comments as well and look forward to continued discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Maroff. Really appreciate your attendance and participation this morning and the continued advocacy and work around this. Just huge thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call up Jared Voskuhl, be followed by Eric Oriana and our last commenter, Debbie Mackey. Good morning. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Chair and board members and all water board staff. It's good to see you. Jared Voskuhl, Director of Regulatory Affairs for CASA, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. CASA represents over 135 agencies and municipalities that engage in the collection, treatment, recycling, and resource recovery of wastewater. You know, I want to pause during this workshop environment and just recognize and thank all the great work that's going on here. Billions upon billions of dollars going out to California communities. It is a huge workload, and only in the last few years has it expanded more. And at the same time, your staff has had numerous transitions with retirements, and new staff have come on, and they've done excellent work on that transition, and they've taken on that new workload. And we want to recognize that. And kind of like infrastructure projects, they take multiple years to get done. And watching this effort, evaluating the work that's been done, there's been a lot of changes in the program, but they've done a great job communicating with us, helping us warm up and accept these and understand how things will be going forward. There's also been the installation of the State Water Board's SRF Stakeholder Advisory Group that was on the heels of the report that came out a couple years ago, and that's provided a great framework for us to continue this effort going forward. You know, last year there was going to be maybe on net less than 200 million awarded out on the initial draft IUP, and through a lot of work we came up with this funding agreement for 3 years of funding. We were going to have an off year next year, and so this year the IUP came out and I saw a recommendation said no off year, and I like take off my glasses and make sure they're clean, and I read it and I thought, well, you know, something's going right. And so, you know, we were very excited to see that kind of outcome, and I think that's a testament to the work we're doing to get the fund in a place that is really responsive to the needs of the community. You know, I think our community is in support of scenario D, which is staff's recommendation. You know, I'll share with them this theme of predictability. When our folks started the first dialogue on this and they said, you know, no off year, they said, no, we agreed to an off year. We don't want that money. You know, and it was kind of this trend of we didn't plan for it. We're not applying for it. Like, we're not using our resources for that. But in talking as a whole, I think our group came around to why this is a good thing. And even though it's a little bit less in terms of new funding per se, I think we have a good understanding of how these projects, you know, add up over time, and we're trying to maintain the sustainable funding capacity. So we want to acknowledge that recommendation and our support for it. Likewise with the water recycling grant program. And the options there, we're supporting water reuse, but we also, you know, don't support option B. And we are continuing those conversations. We'll submit comments there. With regards to the bond that came out, I think there's like 610 million that's just over to the water board. Options for what you could do, no requirements. Through the water board's financial modelers, I think, you know, if you divided it 305, and you model that out, that increases capacity to the wastewater, clean water SRF side by $100 million a year. So we're talking about all these new needs. We need stormwater. We have reduction from federal money. We have new applicants from extension of service. That could be a great way to respond to that while not dinging your overall capacity, which has come to be relied upon by wastewater agencies for their CIP plans. And so, you know, that's just one observation. We're still, you know, developing our positions on all this, but I want to close with just a few updates on the state revolving fund stakeholder advisory group, just some of the work we're doing on the clean water SRF side. One of the projects is kind of identifying shared values. One of those values is we're starting to recognize the need for purchasing impact when we're making funding decisions. And so, you know, there's 63 billion in needs over the next generation. The SRF has 600 million in capacity, so that's 12 billion. Even at a base case scenario, you get SWFIA funding and you could double it up to 24 billion. You're not even halfway there. And so we're really going to have to think about how do we prioritize that. And factors we've considered are the population served. And that goes both ways, right? You need to get a lot of people good projects, but you also don't have small communities that can withstand big projects, right? You also have like acre feet of water delivered if it's a recycling project or something else. Also rate affordability. I think for a lot of large agencies, even we're hearing stories about them having to go out for record rate increases. They have all new projects coming on. They're going to be, butting up against where they can't do it. Likewise for these small communities, if they have projects that have to come on, they don't have the ability to do it either. So these are tough decisions that have to be made. But as we're kind of identifying these shared values, it's helpful for that conversation. When it comes to issues like grants and loans, I want to note we've done some analysis on this with financial advisors. And essentially, whatever your grant amount is, if you double that, that's what your savings in cash would be on interest on a loan. And so, a lot of times we need that free money, right? We need that to keep a project affordable for community. But other times, if it's a big project, you might want that interest savings, from pursuing the loan. And I think that's something we also need to consider. A couple more comments. One is that on maintaining the CIP function, that is something I really hear from our members a lot, with a lot of competing demands for the SRF. We want to make sure that it performs that essential function. And so as more projects are coming on that aren't traditional SRF projects, we want to make sure they have ramps and avenues and pathways for funding. The drinking water side has the SAFER program. I think we think it's very appropriate to have something comparable for extension of service and the human right to water and the sanitation side there. And so that's something we're interested in working on over the next few years. And then, we mentioned the predictability value is something we share. I mean, we like this $50 million cap right now. I know it's for some agencies or big projects, that's hard to do. What the shared value seems to be is short-term $50 million project caps get more money out to projects. But long-term, if there's a way to lift that cap, if there's some kind of regional planning that could go on to make sure these regional priorities are pursued and achieved, you might have projects that are $300 or $400 million. And unless that project cap's lifted, it would be hard for them to be realized. If they're going to impact a large ratepayer base or certain communities, those are the kind of things we want to be sensitive to. And so I'll end on this note of just project characterization, which is kind of where we've left off in our SRF stakeholder group meetings. We started to look at all the projects over the last few years. We did a histogram to bin them, kind of geeky, but what we found was 80% of the projects, it was about 80 of them, came within a range of $0 to $70 million. All the other 20 projects were in that higher range. We're kind of talking about these exceptional projects that need a cap removed, but 80% were in that $70 million range. So then we did an analysis of those 70 projects, and what that broke down to was almost half of those were right less than $20 million. So a large part of your projects are $20 million, and we have a $50 million cap, but that's something to be thoughtful about. We also described them by project types, and so kind of because of that reason I explained the large number in that first range, 80%, it skews your medians and your averages. So your average project cost for water recycling and wastewater treatment plants are about $80 million. Other projects for collections are about $20 million. When you look at it though, on the median cost, what you find is treatment plant projects are about 30 million. Recycling projects are about 45 million. And it kind of makes sense because you're doing more on the recycling side. But it's helpful for us to understand what are these needs going forward as we're planning to know what kind of projects are we contemplating. And if we're going to lift the cap or if we have to pursue larger, costlier regional projects, there might be ways to flex so that maybe in one year, a few agencies get larger loans and then next year, a lot of smaller projects get those loans. And we've heard from Bay Area colleagues staggering projects like that for them on nutrient removal is the only way they can go forward in the Bay with the availability of construction workers, consultants, engineers that can do all that work. They're going to have to stagger in multi-year phases. And so it's, thoughtful that groundwork they're laying, showing us how to do this in an orderly way. We're trying to, watch that, observe it, and incorporate those lessons learned into this work. And so, we continue on over the rest of this year on this. I appreciate the extra time and look forward to continuing the advocacy. Thank you.
Look forward to it as well. Really appreciate, the acknowledgement but just the data-driven approach I know that we're all trying to take and trying to parse out and bucket out how best we can what we know, just huge demand and limited capacity here, but really appreciate it, Mr. Voskuhl. Next, I'd like to call up Eric Oriana, be followed by Debbie Mackey.
Thank you, Chairman and board members. Appreciate the opportunity to share some comments here. Eric Oriana here on behalf of Community Water Center. Wanted to support and align my comments with those of Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and also take the time to appreciate the work PFA staff have done to engage stakeholders in the SRF Stakeholder Advisory Group. I also want to recognize the difficult budget times the state of California is in and the constraint it plays on critical funding programs like clean water programs. I'll be focusing my comments on the small community wastewater Construction Grant Program and appreciate the robust discussion from board members during the presentation. Community Water Center is very concerned to see the limits being set for septic to sewer projects in the amount of $15 million per project. We know that many, if not all, septic to sewer projects will benefit some of the most underserved Californians, those whose counties and the state have disinvested in for decades. It's super important that as funding discussions get difficult, the funding the state preserves first should be that which will help the most overburdened, marginalized, and least invested in communities. So in closing, I wanted to urge the board to increase the project cap to $25 million for small community wastewater construction grant projects. And I want to thank you again for your time to share comments today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oriana. Appreciate that. And the next up is Debbie Mackey.
Okay, there we go. Well, good. I guess we are still morning. Good morning, board members. I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and also want to just give my thanks to staff also. I want to focus actually on one area, and I think that with our comments and our work with CASA and water reuse, we probably will have some more. But I wanted really to focus on that idea of eliminating the incentive for consolidation. Board members Morgan and Firestone talked about just the effort that it takes to do these consolidations, to do the priorities of septic to sewers, and to understand these small community needs. And Board Member McGuire, you also said it takes years to develop. And I think the concern that I want to convey is that it really does take years. And when a board priority then, when incentives for those board priorities get eliminated immediately, it takes away some of those certainty and assurances. And so I would recommend that, should understanding that there's needs to pivot, there's needs to convey and implement priorities, that we still recognize that these efforts take time. And so to give those messages ahead of time, I think as you heard in the discussion about water reuse and other things, when people are not expecting funding to be available, they're not going to invest in that. And then for others that it takes years to get community acceptance, design, feasibility, all those other things, it's going to take time. And then to remove incentives becomes problematic. And then finally, I just want to very much support what Board Member Morgan said as it relates to especially some of these other projects where there's multiple benefits, that there's flexibility in looking at those multiple benefits as part of priority funding, and then also potential to increase funding. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to comment and look forward to us reviewing. And I also want to say, really appreciate the staff presentation, and I look forward to getting deeper into this document. So thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate the comments, Ms. Mackey. And I know in my briefings, I had expressed some concern as well, just about sending the wrong signals out there when it comes to the incentive around consolidations. And I know what we've talked about here, the board also here considering is actually changes to the state revolving funds policies, which live higher up from the intended use plans. And I know in talking to folks that that incentive, its removal in this intended use plan, potentially here within the draft at least, isn't impacting any current projects that may be out there, but certainly, message heard around the chilling effect that it can have insofar as us potentially signaling that we're not looking to support or have those incentives out there. So whether it's here potential reincorporation of that into this intended use plan, or potentially, it better live within the policy so as to send an even clearer message so that, year to year, if it's not enumerated in the intended use plan, others can definitely see that it's living in something a little firmer of a document in the policy. So just thank you. I appreciate the flag, and I know, for myself and for many of the board members here, and appreciate the good leadership. It'll be a topic of discussion as we continue to understand this year's intended use plan. So just huge thanks, Ms. Mackey. Thank you. Yes, please, Board Member Firestone.
So just on this, I think as staff are working through and commenters are thinking about comments, my current thoughts on consolidation incentives are the way that we usually work, or the way that we do work, is that we, if we're looking at a consolidation project, we look at the full project cost. So if in order to consolidate in a small system, there needs to be more capacity, that's not an incentive project, that's part of the project costs. So there can, I think, first of all, there should not be disincentives for consolidation projects, right? And we should make sure we're able to take into account the full project costs. I do think we should just be looking at, it sounds like we don't have this issue, but maybe we could clarify again this, the cap issue when you're doing a consolidation, and thinking about maybe how project costs are defined so that we're really making sure that the receiving system is made whole, and that there aren't disincentives for consolidation and that they're able to support that. So just, and looking at how that plays into the project costs and the definition thereof, I kind of feel more comfortable right now with that than keeping incentive projects. Honestly, I think incentive projects, when we have, 70 small disadvantaged community projects ready to go with complete applications and, an eighth of the funding that we need to fund just those, funding additional grant projects for communities that aren't those doesn't make sense to me. So I do think, as much as I would love to have plenty of funding, I just don't think that it makes sense for where we're at right now. But I do think making sure that what we're truly doing is ensuring there's, that projects are defined in a way where the receiving system is being made whole and able to support those, the full project costs of a consolidation, including needs that may have to be able to serve those customers. And I think there's ways that the receiving system receives some benefits through that in practice, and that can be a real win-win. So just wanted to share that, and would love comments to hear from stakeholders on how that actually plays out, and if there's projects where this would make a big difference. But appreciate that.
Thank you, board member. That brings us to the end of our commenters. Looking to colleagues, if there's anything we haven't covered through the course of our discussions yet that they'd like to bring up. And again, just thank everyone for this morning's engagement. We wish we were in different circumstances, having all the funds to be able to fund everything that is out there and here justifiable, but always it's a matter of prioritization, and appreciate that it is a balance here that we're trying to strike on just the funds that we have before us. But yeah, looking to see if there's anything further even from folks in the program, if they heard anything within the comments that they feel they'd like to respond to. All right, hearing none. This is a workshop, so not a decision point before the board. And so we can wrap up then this item, and just thank again everyone for their engagement. It's been a good morning and well worth having this deep dive on this year's draft intended use plan on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. All right, then that brings us to our next item on today's agenda, which is simply board member reports. Looking to fellow board colleagues, if anyone would like to lead us off in reports, as I myself bring up my calendar.
The only thing that I have to share is just that I participated in the staff workshop last week, I believe on the 27th, for the Koya Subbasin in Visalia.
Thank you, board member. Looking to others here.
I'll add, the only thing I obviously also participated in that, and we were able to get a tour the next day from the different GSAs in that area. And I'll just note how impressed I was with the, I think, very cooperative and proactive and inclusive development of proposals to changes that have been occurring in that particular subbasin. I think it made me very hopeful. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more of the red flag review. But I really appreciate in particular, some of the just recognition of the expertise that local partners in that subbasin have, like self-help, essentially designing the well mitigation program, because they're really the experts there, and really providing that the value to the various stakeholders and partners in their subbasin that aren't just the sort of typical players. So I just found it incredibly valuable, and just, continue to look forward to how, each one of the subbasins are looking at tackling this and sort of taking very seriously the very real severe challenges around groundwater sustainability.
Board member McGuire.
This will sound familiar. I was also at the staff workshop for the Kuya subbasin discussion on their potential probationary decision, and also attended the tour on Friday with board member Firestone.
I'll add on. I was also last week in the Kuya subbasin. Vice Chair Diadamo and I know were able to tour the day prior on Wednesday and just echo the remarkable collaboration that certainly has gone on, and the very demand management forward strategy that the basin has taken on, which is really critical to actually wrap our arms around this. We're not in any decision mode yet, but just really did appreciate the time that folks took to take us out and help us understand all that's going on, and the many layers, certainly through other programs and funding and policies that the board is undertaking that are outside of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, but layered in and very important to the basins there. So much thanks. Vice Chair.
Well, ditto. So I was at the workshop as well, and the tour. And the only thing that I would add is that I was just really impressed with the ability that some portions of the basin have to move class 2 water into groundwater recharge. So I learned quite a bit through that process. And, it just, I probably should have known this, but it just struck me how that class 2 water, is available in many times in year types where it's not necessarily needed, but now it's desperately needed as groundwater recharge. So I'm really looking forward to how concepts like that can be expanded throughout the San Joaquin Valley, where excess surface water is available at certain times. And then also looking forward to, I agree, I think that they did a really good job at the Cahuilla Subbasin utilizing other resources and other organizations that are experts, like Self-Help, like the Sequoia Land Trust, and looking forward to how they plan on incorporating the Irrigated Lands Program and CV salts into their water quality update that they'll be providing us.
You're here. Thank you, Vice Chair. Yeah, I know there was a lot of consternation around the Sustainable Water Management Act and frustration in some communities, but the conversations that have happened really prepared well a number of folks for 2023 and 2024, where really being able to take advantage of excess water when it was available happened because of the forcing function that Sigma really created in the landowner cooperation and district cooperation that we saw. So really appreciate that. All right, that concludes item number 3, our board member reports, and over to Executive Director Eric Oppenheimer on the Executive Director's report. Anything to highlight or any questions here from board members as well on always what is an incredible compendium of information and activity that's going on at the board?
I was just going to mention that the Division of Water Rights issued a permit for the Amador County Water Agency or Amador Water Agency. And I just bring it up because that was one where Board Member McGuire served as a hearing officer, and it was just somewhat novel in that the entire hearing was conducted in writing, and it was a partial assignment of a state filed application. So it's good to get that complete. It's the only thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if there's questions. Happy to answer.
No questions, and just thanks to Board Member McGuire on that service and the completion. Anything from fellow board colleagues? All right, well, that wraps up the Executive Director's report and brings us to the end of today's component of our 2-day board meeting. We will not have closed session, so we will be in recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., where we will start in on our Making Conservation as a Way of Life regulatory decision amongst us all. So just really appreciate the great conversations this morning. Look forward to tomorrow's main event. And for everyone, be safe, be well, stay cool, and we'll see you all tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We're in recess until then. Thank you.